Ready to connect? Click connect to show now. You are connected as the host. Welcome, host. You are now in the host room and can manage your callers from the call-in studio web interface.
In one community, they've been on strike now for months.
Working as long as 12 hours a day, 7 days a week, in some of the most dangerous conditions.
I really think that the labor movement is the single greatest force for democracy in the history of the United States.
The story of Alabama is a story of not just resilience, but of militancy.
I say no contract, you say no code. No contract, no contract.
If we ain't all free, ain't none of us free.
You're listening to Alabama's only union talk radio show, The Valley Labor Report, with Adam Keller and Jacob Morrison.
Right, folks, from the mountains of Kentucky to the bayous of Louisiana, broadcasting online and on the radio from the heart of the Tennessee Valley, the Spice Radio Studio in Huntsville, Alabama. This is The Valley Labor Report. My name is Jacob Morrison, here with my co-host and fellow agitator Adam Keller. Today, we talk to Michael Goldfield about the Mercedes union election and Southern labor. In Argentina, even the cops hate Milei, and public sector workers deserve union rights. All that and more on today's program. If you want to be part of the show today, we've got a phone number and the line is open. You can call 844-899-TVLR. That is 844-899-8857. You can also leave a voicemail throughout the week, and we might respond to it on the next program. If you haven't gotten enough of us by the time that we wrap up here on the radio, or if you just want to see what we're up to throughout the week, you can find us anywhere you find anything online, in particular at our website, TVLR.fm. You can subscribe to our newsletter there, and you can navigate to our store, but it is also, you can go to the URL directly, TVLR.fm/store. We have a rerun of our very popular logo caps, just $35 plus shipping. And you can also support us directly if you appreciate the show through a one-time or monthly recurring contribution at tvlr.fm/donate or patreon.com/The Valley Labor Report. If you are a member of a union, then your local can sponsor the program. We could not do it without the support of our union sponsors. So reach out to us for more details on that if you are interested.
And let me add a disclaimer that any viewpoints or opinions expressed in this program belong solely to their author and do not necessarily represent any organization or sponsor. We welcome all of our listeners, whether you're on YouTube, Facebook, Unclaimed Mysteries Internet Radio, WVNN, WZZA, WHIV, WMMT, or through your favorite podcast app. We are proud to be part of the Labor Radio Podcast Network and encourage our listeners to check that out. And as most of you know, we are not media professionals, just some diehard union brothers who believe that Alabama and the South's labor movement deserve a bigger platform. We're hoping this project can make a difference on that front, and we could not do it without you. So we want to thank everyone for tuning in. Whether you're a loyal fan or a first-time listener, we appreciate you spending some time with us this morning.
That's right. And with that, let's go ahead and jump right into last week in Southern labor. This is what workers in the U.S. South and the American colonies were up to from May the 18th to the 24th. In new union campaigns, 2 workers at Spectrum in Washington, D.C. filed a petition to hold a union election with the International Union of Operating Engineers, IUOE, Local 99. 9 workers at BMC of St. Charles in O'Fallon, Missouri, filed a petition to hold a union election with the Teamsters, Local 682. 2 workers at Prime Communications in Opelika, Alabama, filed a petition to hold a union election with the Communication Workers of America, CWA, Local 3908. 55 security guards at Allied Universal in Tampa, Florida, filed a petition to hold a union election with the Security, Police, and Fire Professionals of America, SPFPA. 58 workers at Innovative Solutions Unlimited in Aiken, South Carolina, filed a petition to hold a union election with the Teamsters, Local 509. 7 workers at Ryder Transportation Solutions in Elizabethtown, Kentucky, filed a petition to hold a union election with the Teamsters, Local 89. In campaign updates, workers at Natural Grocers in Norman, Oklahoma, recently won a union election, and it has since come out that the small grocery store retained a union-busting consulting group at a rate of $450 per hour per person to try unsuccessfully to beat the union campaign, comprising of about a dozen low-wage grocery workers. In election, I mean,
that's a wild one.
That's wild. That's absolutely crazy. I mean, these folks making, like $11, $12 an hour. You're spending $450 an hour to kill a union. Absolutely bonkers. 28 workers at Barnes & Noble in Austin, Texas, voted 6-20 against unionization with the United Food and Commercial Workers, UFCW, Local 455. 20 workers at Vitamin College Natural Foods in Norman, Oklahoma, voted 11-9 in favor of UFCW, Local 1000. 15 workers at H&M in Melbourne, Florida, voted 13-1 in favor of unionization with UFCW, Local 1625. 13 workers at NTE Mobility Partners in Farmers Branch, Texas, voted 2-9 against unionization with the Transportation Systems Union. 3 security guards at Max Cent in Arlington, Virginia, in a first for me, did not vote, as in nobody voted in the election at all. So SPFPA did not win the election, and the company remains non-union. And I do not saw the note in there, Adam. I do not think that was a website error. I looked at the the letter of certification, and it said, no union. It didn't say the votes in the certification letter, but not that unreasonable to believe that 3 security guards didn't vote in their own union election. But I don't
Interesting.
know. It's kind of bizarre because they would have, at least one of them would have had to sign a petition to get the election called. So I don't know. Another weird one here in last week in Southern labor. 3 workers at Midwest Air Traffic Control Service voted 3-0. In favor of unionization with the National Air Traffic Controllers Association, NATCA. 79 workers at United Natural Foods and Albert's Organics in Sarasota, Florida, voted 75-0 in favor of unionization with Teamsters, Local 79. 73 workers at Lycée François de la Nouvelle Orleans in New Orleans, Louisiana, voted 52-12 in favor of unionization with the United Teachers of New Orleans, AFT, Local 527. 100 security guards at Paragon Systems in El Paso, Texas, voted 13-5 in favor of unionization with the SPFPA. In settlements, grievances, and unfair labor practices, the UAW has filed objections to the election at Mercedes in Vance, Alabama, demanding a rerun after egregious violations of the law, which included discharging pro-union workers, disciplining union supporters, and subjecting workers to mandatory anti-union propaganda meetings. Workers at a St. Louis Amazon warehouse filed unfair labor practice charges against the company for their surveillance of the workers and illegal activity under the National Labor Relations Act. In strikes and bargaining updates, after successfully unionizing with the United Steelworkers about this time last year, 1,500 workers at Bluebird in Fort Valley, Georgia, which is an electric bus manufacturer, ratified a contract this week that contains average raises of 12% over 3 years, with the lowest paid seeing over 40% in raises by the end of the contract. Additional provisions of the contract include establishing a retirement plan, profit sharing, and more. Acting Labor Secretary Julie Sue released a statement congratulating the workers. Teamsters Local 420 announced that members had ratified a contract with Molson Coors that includes increased wages and better benefits, according to the union, ending the 3-month strike. Durham, North Carolina educators are seeking recognition of their union, the Durham Association of Educators, through meet and confer rights with their local school board, and 50 of the union's members walked out of the most recent school board meeting in protest. In politics and legislation updates, the House Armed Services Committee defeated an anti-union amendment to the NDAA that would have removed project labor agreements from the act, with 4 of 30 GOP members joining all Democrats in opposition. 66,000 workers in Alabama are set to see an increase in pay thanks to the new overtime rule issued by the Biden Department of Labor. Democrats in the U.S. House and Senate introduced legislation to remove the cap on damages that can be awarded to victims of age discrimination with the support of AFGE. And Democrats also introduced the Public Service Freedom to Negotiate Act, which guarantees state and municipal workers the rights to collective bargaining that are enjoyed by private sector workers nationwide, with the support of AFT and the CWA. In internal union affairs, rank-and-file workers Reese Murtaugh and Marty Rosato won election to the president and secretary-treasurer of the International Association of Machinists District Lodge 19, which represents 8,000 rail repairmen. And the SEIU has elected a new diverse leadership slate with the election of a black woman to the presidency of the SEIU. 2 of the 3 largest unions in the country are led by black women. That is it. If we missed anything, you can reach out to us, tvlr.fm/contact, and let us know about your union updates, and we will include it on next week's Roundup. We're going to be right back with Michael Goldfield. He is a professor emeritus at Wayne State University, studier of labor history, and author of The Southern Key, a fascinating book about Southern labor history. Lots of great stuff that he's written, so really excited to talk to him. It's going to be a great conversation. Stay tuned. You're listening to the Valley Labor Report. Benefit Architects has proudly supported union members and union-made products for over 35 years. If you are a federal employee and an AFGE member, you're eligible for hundreds of dollars in money-saving benefits, including group life insurance, dental insurance, and AFLAC insurance. Additionally, if you're a union member but don't work for the federal government, you can still qualify for several of these money-saving policies. So give Tate Hure a call at 256-215-6769 for details and to enroll. Again, that is Tate Hure at 256-215-6769.
In Alabama, more than 200,000 of our friends and family members are living without health care coverage. Often folks can't stay healthy enough even to keep their jobs. We can fix this. It's time for us to find a way to close the health care coverage gap so that people can remain at work. Let's make this a priority. Let's close this gap and cover Alabama. To learn more and how you can help, visit coveralabama.org.
The attorneys at Maples, Tucker & Jacobs have stood with the working people of Alabama for over 40 years, providing skilled legal representation for your workplace injury claims. When you are injured on the job, it can be a scary time. The attorneys at Maples, Tucker & Jacobs have the experience to guide you through the process to make sure that you and your family are properly taken care of and your rights are protected. If you need help, call the attorneys at Maples, Tucker & Jacobs at 855-617-9333 or visit online at www.mtnj.com. No representation is made that the quality of legal services provided is greater than the quality of legal services provided by other law firms.
Support for the Valley Labor Report comes from the International Federation of Professional and Technical Engineers Union. Learn more by visiting www.ifpte.org.
Attention union members, membership organizations, podcasters, or anyone with a payment processing need. The future is here, and your organization needs to be prepared by working with Unionly. With Unionly, your union or organization can take payments on a mobile device, eliminating processing fees, giving you a better price than other payment processing methods, while at the same time supporting a union-friendly business with a specialized skill set to meet your needs. Your members will thank you when they pay their dues at their convenience without waiting in line to deposit cash or check. Start preparing for the future today by calling 206-595-8631 or visiting unionly.io.
Are you looking for a better future, a career that can have you set for life, and to be a part of something that's bigger than yourself? If you are, then consider a skilled trades apprenticeship with the International Union of Painters and Allied Trades. The work of IUPAT is all around us, from the industrial painters who work on the bridges to drywall finishers, floor coverers, the glazers who install the glass in our skylines, and so much more. With an IUPAT apprenticeship, you earn while you learn and receive benefits while learning the trade, including a pension. We provide world-class education free of charge. That's right, no student debt. Our starting salaries for apprentices that graduate is above the national median salary with benefits for entire families. And you have the flexibility to take your trade wherever you'd like in the country to work. IUPAT District Council 77 covers our entire region, so give Adam Booth a call at 205-603-3142 for more information. Again, that phone number is 205-603-3142. Come build a better future with us today and join IUPAT.
I'm attorney Tommy Sinyard. When you've been injured and need help, you need a lawyer who's with you.
Sinyard Law. You need attorneys always available to take care of you.
Sinyard Law. And keep you in the loop. It's your case. You need to know what's happening.
Sinyard Law. And never a charge to meet with us to evaluate your case.
Sinyard Law. A new firm, but an old name. One that will stay with you every step of the way.
Sinyard Law, the name with proven results.
Support for this program is provided by the International Association for Machinists and Aerospace Workers, Local Lodge 44 in Decatur, Alabama. Learn more at IAMAW44.org.
Come on, you poor workers, good news to you I'll tell, how the good old union has come in here to dwell.
Labor creates all wealth should go to labor, and you are listening to the Valley Labor Report. My name is Jacob Morrison, here with my co-host and fellow agitator Adam Keller. If you've got anything to add, you can give us a call. The phone number is 844-899-TVLR. That is 844-899-8857. Really quickly, before we bring on Professor Goldfield, even the cops in Argentina do not like the self-proclaimed anarcho-capitalist president, Javier Milei. This is a wild story I wanted to make sure that we told you about today. So teachers in Misiones, Argentina, claim that they are the lowest paid teachers in the country, according to reporting on these protests by the Buenos Aires Herald, with new teachers being paid the equivalent of $254 per year, not per week or per month or, per year, $254. And those teachers claim that the situation has worsened under Milei as the federal government has stopped sending some of the money that the provincial school system used to receive, which is one of the reasons that despite the 280% inflation since April, the teachers have not gotten a raise. In addition, to teachers not getting the raises that they deserve, at least in part due to Milei's government and his policies, the schools have also stopped serving breakfast for students and stopped paying janitors altogether. And now, these facts on the ground, the enormous protests that are erupting all around Argentina, are a really strange juxtaposition as you see right-wingers celebrating Milei in America and celebrating his policies and celebrating what he is doing to the country. It's just really bizarre when you can, you can actually take a look and see what's going on, and what's going on directly due to Milei's government. Obviously, the inflation and the hyperinflation going on in Argentina, that was there before Milei started, before Milei was elected to president. But at least before Milei was elected to president, the teachers were getting some raises to try to, the school systems were trying to keep up a little bit with that inflation. And instead, and this is his whole theory. This is the whole shtick about how we can kill inflation, according to Milei and the like, is just simply by not paying workers and expecting them to continue doing the work while prices continue to rise and while capitalists continue to suck the value out of the workers that are actually producing. That's the whole shtick. So because of those complaints, the teachers in Misiones have been protesting since Milei took office for months now, but they finally officially went on strike on Thursday. Now, typically in situations like these, the cops are going to be breaking the strikes. They're going to violently repress the citizens. They are going to and their violence is not even, it knows no bounds. They will even assault and attack women, as many teachers are, as cops have done during labor disputes in this country. But instead, in Misiones, the cops have joined the teachers in the protest, and they have been giving the teachers like tires and stuff to set up and to burn and all of this kind of stuff. Both groups are demanding a 100% raise. So yeah, wild story. I wanted to make sure that we shared this with you because it's not every day that we get to share a story about cops not being terrible. But this does not mean, I don't want to get your hopes too high, because this does not mean that all cops in Argentina are magically great, because the same day that the police were protested in solidarity with the striking teachers in Misiones, police were assaulting reporters who were covering other protests in Buenos Aires with Telesur, reporting on some of the police violence in the country's capital. Moving back to this country, Professor Michael Goldfield is an esteemed academic, studier of labor history in the South in particular, the author of The Southern Key, Class, Race, and Radicalism in the 1930s and 40s. It's a great book. I just finished it, and really excited to be able to have this conversation with the professor. So, Professor Goldfield, thank you for taking the time to talking to us. Thank you for taking the time and talking to us today. I appreciate it.
Oh, thank you. I'm pleased to be here. Talking about the history of Alabama and Southern labor is one of my favorite things to do.
Yes, well, one of our favorite things to do as well, but obviously we are biased in a certain sense. But, the biggest thing, obviously, in the South right now is, as far as labor is concerned, the biggest news item is the UAW's campaign to organize the non-union auto sector. They had, last month, a huge victory at Volkswagen, 73% of the workers voting in favor of unionization. And it seemed like, at least from the reporting and everything that we saw in the media, that there was potentially going to just be an unstoppable momentum, and the UAW was going to be able to ride that wave to the organization of at least a few more non-union plants before things started getting more and more difficult. And that momentum was kind of stopped pretty abruptly at the Mercedes plant with workers there voting against unionization by about 11 or 12 points. It was 56-44 in terms of percentages against the union. And I think there are some people that have said, the momentum theory is there was probably a bit too much hype behind that. But it's going to be difficult everywhere, but also everywhere there's a real possibility of victory. So I'm just being a studier of labor history, having spent decades and decades reading, firsthand primary sources, other people's academic work, what are your first thoughts about the results from the Mercedes election and the UAW's campaign writ large?
Okay, well, I think you have to put this, to give a sober analysis, you have to put this in historical perspective. It was overhyped about the period of right now of labor ascendancy. While there have been a lot of exciting things going on, Starbucks organizing, the VW victory, the struggle of the Mercedes trucks in North Carolina and elsewhere. If we look at the data, union membership in the last year has gone up about 100,000, but percentage-wise, it's about the same as it was the year before. If we look at the upsurges nationally and in Alabama, 1918, 1919, when union membership in the country as a whole had doubled in 5 years, or in 1933, when Alabama and U.S. nationally coal miners organized, union membership went up 20% in 1 year. So this is not that type of ascendancy. Secondly, very large plants from powerful companies, and this includes steel plants in Pennsylvania and Illinois, not just in the South, are always much harder to organize than smaller than smaller enterprises. So we have a plant in Vance, 6,000 workers with a company with very deep pockets. And I would like to separate the type of opposition. A lot of the hype has to do with political opposition. Governors and local people and whatnot. In my looking at labor history, this is almost never very relevant. What is that mostly it's noise unless they call out the troops and start bringing in scabs and shooting workers, which hasn't been going on that much in the current period. So I think it's a big plant. The opposition inside the plant by the company was very, very important. The UAW itself feels that maybe they called the election too soon, and to sign up people to sign cards, they used digital technology rather than carefully recruiting people one-on-one inside the plant. So this was a difficult situation, and they lost. We'll see what happens. Volkswagen, they had been organizing for a long time. They lost 2 elections. And I think that Mercedes did pull out lots of stops. One of the things in the union playbook is to fire the plant manager and blame him for a lot of the problems in the plant. So there's a lot of factors here. So that's my initial assessment, and there's still more research to be done. But I think some of the other explanations that people give, Southern workers aren't prone to unionization, that's just not, and particularly in Alabama, that's just not true historically.
Yeah, that's been something that, as the dust has been settling, there have been at least a few, conservative commentators in Politico, and certainly the politicians really kind of trying to dance on what they perceive as the grave of this campaign, and attributing the loss of the UAW at the Mercedes plant to politics. They're saying that these workers are conservative, these workers vote Republican, and the UAW wants a ceasefire in Gaza. I mean, that was one of the things that I saw somebody say yesterday, and it's just like, I haven't read even a single interview where a single worker mentions the situation in Israel as a pro or a con, right? I mean, it's just not been a factor in the campaign as far as I can tell. And so, I mean, what is your reaction to people who are in this specific instance, and then we can broaden it out, but in this specific instance, attributing the loss to the culture and the politics, and are they doing this I guess, what's your reaction to that? And then why do you think they say that? Are they just dumb? They just don't know anything? Or is there some sort of self-flattery going on here? Or is it somehow beneficial for them to try to perpetuate this narrative about Southern workers? I'm interested in your thoughts on all of that.
So one of the calling cards in Alabama and throughout the South for well over a century has always been, come here. We pay workers less. Originally, it was because there was an agricultural economy in which people were barely getting by, and even working in textile plants was an improvement for people financially. And that continues to be their calling card. But in terms of openness to unions, in periods of ascendancy, Southern and Alabama workers in particular have always, when given the opportunity, have been very pro-union. So Alabama coal miners, which were the center of the Alabama labor movement from the late 19th century until the 1950s, as coal began to disappear in Alabama, were always at the forefront. They were leaders in the late 19th century strikes. They were among the first to organize in 1933, even before there were legislation passed. They were the biggest supporters of Big Jim Folsom in 1946 when he ran for first time for governor and the second time. And if we look at the periods of union ascendancy, in Birmingham, there was a steel election that the NLRB that was run where the workers voted 300-2 in favor of the union. So we didn't have any hesitancy then. And I think that continues to be the place, the type of repression by companies and the threats to people's jobs that they might be fired, not be employable, are very real. When unions are on the rise and on a roll, these things get pushed to the side. And I think this has been true in the South as well. So I don't think it's cultural. I think it's actually physical fear, class battles, loss of livelihood. These are real threats, and that's much more important than so-called culture. And there's always been an attempt to look at cultural explanations. So during the coal organizing, union organizers were shot, workers were shot, and workers in Alabama and elsewhere armed, and they said, oh, this is cultural. This is a gun culture. No, this was self-defense. And so there's always an attempt to look at cultural factors when they're really secondary, particularly in terms of union organizing. At least that's my cut on things. And as some examples of how little impact the political elites have on union organizing, in Mississippi, which was even more repressive than Alabama and didn't have the political support of unions and a governor who was sympathetic to unions. In 1947, in Laurel, Mississippi, when the textile workers came to organize, and they were supported by other unionized workers in Laurel, Senator Bilbo and Congressman Rankin, among the most racist anti-union of politicians, came to town and campaigned against the unions, and the workers, including the overwhelming majority of white workers, voted 5-1 for the union. And there are lots of examples where workers put their own unionization 100 times ahead of any rhetoric that political elites gave about why they shouldn't vote for the union. So
one of the I think just one more illustration, and I think that, forgive me for using a reference that's not from your book, but maybe you'll recognize it, was from the coal miners in Alabama during really the depths of Jim Crow, and as the I think it was 1905 that this incident happened. Immediately following the rewriting of the Constitution by racist white supremacist redeemers, the coal miners union, which was always interracial in Alabama. It wasn't perfect. Black people were not allowed to be president at the time, but black people were elected to vice president, and so they were there were black folks in the hierarchy above white folks in this union in Alabama post 1901. And before 1901, but post is kind of more interesting. And in the Birmingham Labor Council, there was a move to segregate the hall, or it was either segregate the hall or not allow. I think it was not allow black people in the hall at all. And the UMW said, you're not going to do that, or we're going to disaffiliate from you. And that is, talking about how the cultural explanations kind of fall flat. There was no stronger culture in Alabama immediately post 1901 than white supremacy, and this union of black and white workers stood up against it. The cultural explanations really do continuously fall flat, and textiles in particular, you were alluding to there, there's a big like religious component that people ascribe to the textile workers, it seems, as one of the reasons why they didn't organize. Speaking about, religion specifically, how has that argument fallen flat when we're talking about culture, narrowing it to religion in the context of union organizing in the South?
Yeah, so the history of it. So Alabama had a big textile industry, but it was much smaller than North Carolina, which had the biggest, and also South Carolina and whatnot. But the Alabama textile workers were the most militant in the country and the most pro-union, the first to organize. They forced the 1934 general strike, and they were supported by the coal miners in doing this. They had 100% unionization throughout the state. And they had the confidence that they had support of a powerful labor movement within Alabama. So in terms of people's lives, what they spend 8, 10, or 12 hours a day, and in Vance and Mercedes, there's lots of forced overtime, as there is in all these non-union plants. I worked for 9 years in an international harvester plant outside of Chicago, and we had a right to turn down overtime. And they had to tell us in advance when they wanted us to work. Workers at these non-union transplants do not have any of these rights. And these are the predominating things that happen. I worked on an assembly line for 9 years. I was much younger than I am now, but people's bodies break down. This is rough work. No matter how ergonomically it's designed, people hold pneumatic tools above their head. They do all sorts of things that repetitive motions that destroy their bodies. And if you're injured permanently, the company lets you go. You don't have any rights to continuance of your pay, your job, or anything else. So these are the dominating things in people's lives, and whatever religion they have, whoever they vote for, these are the things that affect them. And this almost seems obvious if you talk to workers, or if you think about their situation. The other things fall by the wayside. So I'm hopeful that unionization will continue. We're not yet in a period of massive upsurge, but if it takes place, I think the transplants across the South will unionize just like everybody else.
And it's very trivially correct that the cultural explanations do fall flat. Like when you do actually read about what's going on here, just reading even not labor reporters talking about this that happened in Vance. There's just so much that can be gleaned about how and why these things shake out from actually listening to the workers themselves, as opposed to trying to impose your own politics and worldview and whatever that may be onto these workers and onto these struggles. There's a lot to be said for just listening and kind of figuring out what's going on, as opposed to trying to make stuff up. So your contention is that it's very material. Typically, the way that these things shake out, it's all kind of derivative of what's going on materially in people's lives. And you opened talking about how the South has gotten or their calling card has been manufacturers, industries. Come to the South. You can exploit our people. You can take advantage of our people. You can pay them less. You don't have to worry as much about safety. We're not really going to bother you about that. It's not a big deal. And that's how the political elite have been enticing industries to come to the South. And so you mentioned that one of the real concerns among the folks in these plants is about job loss, either individually or the closure of a plant. And we've seen plants close. We've seen union and non-union plants close. In fact, just 2 weeks ago, a mid-sized manufacturing plant in Hartselle, Alabama, Linamar I can't remember what they make, but 150 people were laid off. The plant closed, but it was non-union, so people aren't going to be talking about it 20 years later like they do with Dunlop. So, how could you, and this isn't something that I said that I was going to ask you about. So, if you're not prepared for it, then just let us know. But the destruction of the steel industry in the South and in the country has been a big part, or has been a part of the anti-union campaign. And this is something that's really definitely more material than, oh, I like Jesus, so I'm going to vote against the union, right? There's something real there. What would your response be if you were in the plant, or if you were, on staff with the UAW and folks were talking to you and they were concerned about plant closures because, my daddy or my granddaddy was in a steel mill, was in a steel manufacturing shop, and it was union and it closed down. How can unions and pro-union workers respond to that?
So I think where manufacturing takes place is a result of lots of factors. So the U.S. steel industry lost out. They did not invest in the newest technology. South Korea in the 1960s and 1970s had by far more efficient steel production than places in the U.S. If you look at the places around Pittsburgh and Chicago and Indiana, these were huge old mills where they had put new investment. They were milking the old technology, and they finally became non-competitive. So Alabama was a secondary steel producer, and the problem with the Birmingham area is that the iron ore was less pure, and the coal was not as good for producing steel. So this declined, and it turned out that there were other places in the world with much richer iron ore, and lots of access to coal for coke, but particularly the iron ore. So we lost out for a variety of reasons, and I think unions were pretty secondary to this. South Korea is still a major steel producer, and their heavy manufacturing workers are highly unionized and very militant. So while the union factor plays a role, there's lots of complicating things. So, for example, in unionized workplaces, workers quit less often. They have a more reliable workforce. That's a plus for companies that need trained workers and don't want to be replacing workers. So Amazon, for example, decided that high turnover doesn't bother them. People do repetitive physical tasks, loading boxes, this and that. Most of it does not require a skill. On the other hand, working in a steel mill or an auto plant requires more skill and training to do the jobs, and particularly to maintain quality. So there might even be advantages for some of them. But even if we look at the state figures for auto manufacturing jobs, there are about 1 million direct automobile industrial workers in the United States, a little over 1 million. Almost 200,000 of them are still in Michigan, which is by far the state with the highest motor vehicle transportation employment. So they haven't abandoned Michigan to the degree that people claim. Factories have moved out of Detroit, but if you look outside Detroit, where I lived for several decades, there are places in Macomb County where you can go for several miles and all you see are auto plants. And that dwarfs anything in any other state. Alabama is critical. So Alabama, if we don't count Kentucky, which was a border state and is, I don't consider really the South, certainly it's not the deep South like Alabama is. Alabama has 45 to 50,000 auto and parts production, fifth highest state in the country. The others tend to be in the Midwest that are above Alabama. So Alabama is central, and auto has lots of ramifications. So while there are 1 million production workers, there are 2 million in sales and retail. There's another 1 million in repair. And there are lots of other feeder industries, rubber, tires, et cetera, that feed the auto industry in ways that steel, for example, don't. You produce steel and that's it. Maybe you make some steel parts in some things, but auto draws upon large percentage of the rest of the economy. So it's really more central than any other industry to the country. So I'm hopeful that Alabama workers will unionize at some point. If the big labor upsurge takes place in the country as a whole, the likelihood increases. But patient work in terms of organizing in the plant, overcoming people's fears in the long run, I think will bear fruit.
Right. You know, the and one more topic on, you know, why do or don't workers organize, is that I wanted to give you some time to speak about, was the National Labor Relations Act. I know that's I don't know if you would go so far as to say it's a bailiwick of yours, but it's something that you are, you know, interested in beating back some of the prevailing narratives around the National Labor Relations Act and the effect that it had on unionization. And so if you could just, you know, explain to the audience the popular narrative as you see it surrounding the National Labor Relations Act and then Section 7A of the National Industrial Recovery Act, the NIRA. Explain the prevailing narrative as you see it, and what the problems are with that narrative.
Okay, so one of the things that people claim, including a lot of unions, is that the laws hold back workers from organizing. My analysis of looking at the long sweep of labor history is that most unionization takes place during massive upsurges. The period during and right after World War I, when union membership doubled. The period in the 1930s, starting with the organization of coal miners before Section 7A had even passed. 600,000 coal miners in the country unionized from a union that seemed to be falling apart. You had these massive radical-led strikes in 1934, the San Francisco General Strike and West Coast Longshoremen, Toledo Auto Light Strike, where 30,000 people picketed and fought the National Guard, the Minneapolis Teamster Strike, and then the Flint Strike, where workers in Flint, Michigan, which was the heart of General Motors production facilities, seized their plant and said they were willing to die if the troops came in. So these things led to massive labor upsurges, even without any really enabling legislation. Another example seems to me teacher organizing, which is among the most highly unionized occupation in the country today. Before 1960, there were hardly any teachers unionized. At late 1960, in December, 50,000 teachers in New York City, which had, contrary to popular opinion, had the most repressive labor legislation for state and local employees. 50,000 teachers went out. The New York City political leaders were afraid to enforce the legislation because there was the strike was unanimous. Before that, there were hardly any teachers organized. Within months, every big city in the country had a militant American Federation of Teachers local, and teachers unionism spread throughout the country. And it spread even before there was any enabling legislation in virtually any state. Most states hit 70% unionization before any laws were passed. So I don't see that these laws, and the laws today certainly aren't as draconian as earlier laws used to be. So, yeah, some of the laws may make it more difficult, but when union workers decide to organize, the laws fall by the wayside. So I don't see labor law reform as very important in terms of preventing or helping unionization. So that's my cut in looking at these things historically, and I think there's an overemphasis on people thinking that the laws will help them as opposed to organizing and mass struggle.
And, you know, speaking of the laws, you know, moving to politics kind of more broadly, you know, there's this one fellow online that has an opinion that a lot of people have, which is that unions are not these, more broadly important organizations. They are narrow, self-serving institutions said neutrally, right? It's the fellow who says this. He's not trying to say it in a bad way necessarily. He's just saying, look, unions, they serve their members. They don't really do all that much else. So sometimes they do good things, sometimes they do bad things, but they do it for their members. And that's basically it. There's not really any greater benefit to society from unions or unionization or anything like that. And I do not believe that. That does not seem to me to be the case. And one of the things that you have pointed out in your book is Alabama exceptionalism, how Alabama in the South was uniquely unionized and workers had more power in Alabama through that strong labor movement, and there were broader gains experienced by non-union people in Alabama from the political power and the economic power of the labor movement here in Alabama. Can you just respond to that claim of unions unions not really super important, narrow, self-serving institutions, sometimes good, sometimes bad?
No, I think you're right. Alabama is the perfect example. Once coal miners, so the most militant groups earliest to organize, well, first were coal miners, steel workers in the Birmingham area, iron ore miners in the counties around Birmingham. And these unions look to support struggles all over the state. They help the farmers union organize. They help school teachers organize. They help people all over. There's an interesting story. So Gadsden became a highly unionized area. In 1947, it had 60,000 people, 10,000 of whom were members of the CIO. When laundry workers went out, several hundred laundry workers went on strike, the company fired them all and tried to bring in scabs. Thousands of workers from other industries, steel, textile, came and joined the picket lines and forced the company to rehire the workers. So it's just not true that unions, particularly in Alabama, have only looked out for their own members. They've looked out for everybody. The other thing in Alabama, under Folsom, the union movement forced the country to force the state to pass the broadest workmen's compensation law in the country. And in particular, it was the only state in the country that had black lung, which is what most older miners die of because it keeps them from breathing and debilitates them, as a compensated disease from work. Other places, other states refuse to recognize that as an actual workplace disease. So the other thing, it forced education reforms, highways, lots of things throughout the state that made, some of which in terms of the university system still remain in the state, even from long ago. So I think the union movement, even when the unions were not that radical, and the radical unions tended to push for more, but even when they weren't that radical, it looked out for broad interests of working class people in the state as a whole. So I think, and that's a common feature of union history in the South and elsewhere. The other thing that unionization had forced non-union employers to wages and benefits. And if we look at the Detroit area, Detroit, at the heyday of the auto industry in Michigan, 1940s, 1950s, had not only the highest pay per capita of workers in general, but the smallest gaps between black and white workers in general. It had the highest degree of home ownership of any city in the country, the highest degree of non-white home ownership. So these are broad societal gains that unions have come to deliver for working class people. And this is actually fairly common today, that there are many people now arguing that the economic inequality and the huge disparity between the rich and the poor has grown worse as unionization has declined in the country over the past several decades. Right. So this is a non-empirical argument that people give. I mean, I hear this all the time. People say, railroad unions want more people so they can have feather bedding. Well, they have these huge trains, right, that are prone to accidents. And railroad companies want only one person on these trains that go for miles and miles. Right. And the unions say, if you don't have at least two people, when you have an accident or something happens, you can't even deal with it. One person cannot deal with an accident like that. Companies say, we've automated everything, you don't have to worry. But there are people killed and there are railroad accidents. So in this place in Ohio where the train derailed and there were, 10 or 15 cars full of dangerous chemicals, which they were worried would kill lots of people and was burned off. The company just settled for several $100 million because of the accident. And these things are all too common.
Right. And so, circling back to today, what do you think workers and unions and supporters in the community should take from your work? What lessons should we learn and apply as we're talking to our coworkers? Do you feel like these are lessons that the UAW has learned, from their own study of history or from other people or from you? Are we in a moment of potential upsurge? Where like you said, in the past millions of people have come to unions and organized. What does the recent BLS statistics tell us about the moment that we're in, and how can we apply some of the lessons of history to the moment that we're in?
Yeah, so I think there are a lot of exciting things going on, but we're not yet in a period of upsurge. So we can look at the different sectors which are been mobilizing. Certainly, I think the Starbucks and other retail workers, REI, Trader Joe's, whatnot, that's exciting. But these workers have very little leverage, what I call structural power in the economy. There are 10 to 15,000 Starbucks places in the country. That's out of 40,000 coffee houses, not counting Dunkin' Donuts and some of the other places that sell coffee. So even if these people were all organized and went on strike, they wouldn't keep anybody from getting coffee. And that's why there's so much more hype about the auto industry. The other industries that are important are the logistics industry. This is the whole warehouse and delivery system, of which Amazon is at the pinnacle of which there was also a big battle in Bessemer, which was a former stronghold of the mine, mill, and smelter workers, a left-wing, very militant union. So these types of places have lots of structural power and leverage. But in the present period, people have to spend a lot of time doing careful internal organizing, building up their support, which it sounds like from the union's own self-criticism, they didn't do enough of in advance. They thought, according to their statement, that if they called a quick election, that they could take the company by storm, which they didn't do. And I think that aside from the inside thing, all of us, and particularly those of us in unions in an area, giving all the support we can to organizing campaigns that are going on. And that's the history in Alabama. These more powerful unions gave support to workers who didn't have the leverage that they did. Coal miners and steel workers gave support to textile, which doesn't have the leverage that those unions have. So I think these are interesting times, important for us all to be involved, important that radio programs like yours, if there are other ones like yours, but certainly your radio program publicizing labor events as they go on, keeping people aware. I mean, one of the interesting things about Alabama is that it seems to me, and you know more about this than I do, but in talking to people, people are very unaware of the militant, broad labor history that Alabama has. Right. And that's in contrast to a place like West Virginia, where people are much more conscious of the history of militant mine worker organizing. Interestingly, when the teachers in West Virginia statewide went on strike a few years ago, a lot of them had signs from their coal worker organizing in which their parents or grandparents had been involved in. Right. So I think also making people aware of the culture and history of unionization in Alabama is really important, because people have something to identify with and don't have to think about all the noise from contemporary politics, much of which isn't very helpful or inspiring.
Right. Professor Goldfield, really appreciate your time. It's been great. Look forward to continuing to keep the conversation going in the future. Always feel free to reach out if you feel like there's anything that you know.
Yeah, no, thank you. I also want to say, if people do want a copy of my recent book on Southern labor organizing, there is a discount flyer available, which I guess they can get from you.
Yes, there's a discount flyer. We will we'll post it on Twitter and Facebook, and you can order it at OUP.com, Oxford University Press, OUP.com, with the promo code AAFLYG6, AAFLYG6, and you'll get 30% off. That's
pretty good deal.
That's a pretty good deal.
It's really worth it.
I paid full price for it.
Yeah, Jacob and I both paid full price. Happy to do so. It was well worth it. Professor Goldfield, really appreciate your time and all your work, particularly elevating the stories of Alabama. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you very much, and you guys keep up the great work that you're doing.
Yes, sir. Will do.
Professor Goldfield, author of The Southern Key, Class, Race, and Radicalism in the 1930s and 40s. Check it out. It's a great book. One of the best I've read in a long time. Really good stuff. A very compelling read. You know, not only is there a lot of great information in there, but it's an easy read. It's compelling. It's interesting. So, you know, didn't want to put it down. So definitely recommend checking it out. OUP.com with promo code AAFLYG6 for 30% off. We're going to take a break. We're going to be right back with to wrap up the program. Appreciate everybody staying tuned. 844-899-TVLR is the phone number if you want to call in. We'll be right back.
In Alabama, more than 200,000 of our friends and neighbors are living without health care coverage. Often folks can't stay healthy enough to keep their jobs. We need to fix this. Let's close the health care coverage gap. To learn more, visit coveralabama.org.
Support for this program also comes from the Iron Workers, Local 477. So if you are looking for contractors with lower than average EMR and TRIR, they tell me that if you need to know what those mean, then you will. Or if you need to supplement a workforce at any level for any amount of time, short or long term, if you need iron workers that come trained and certified at no extra cost, or if you need workers from superintendent down to general laborer, and you're looking to start work on a project, or you're unhappy with your current contractor situation, you need to call my friend Jeb Miles with the Iron Workers Local 477. They only work with the best in the business, vetted contractors, and can do all kinds of jobs, from roofing to steel and bridge erection, from welding to heavy rigging, from structural repairs to machinery alignment, and much more. They supply manpower on 4 of the 5 largest projects in North Alabama, so you know they're legit. If you need good quality, safe, efficient, diligent, and knowledgeable workers on your job, then you need the Iron Workers Local 477. Call Jeb Miles at 256-383-3334 or via email at local477@bellsouth.net, and make sure you tell them that you heard about them on the Valley Labor Report.
We're the nurses, firefighters, and claims representatives that help keep our government services running. We respond to natural disasters. We care for our nation's veterans, and we investigate discrimination in the workplace. We are federal and D.C. government workers, and we are proud to serve the American people. Working in more than 70 agencies across the government, we know we can fulfill our mission because our union has our back. Learn more at afge.org. Paid for by the American Federation of Government Employees, AFL-CIO.
The Laborers International Union of North America, Local 366, is proudly recruiting North Alabama workers to work construction and nuclear plant maintenance. If you're interested, please contact Donna at their training center to start the process. That phone number is 256-415-7452. Again, that phone number is 256-415-7452. No experience is needed. Free training is offered, but you must be able to pass a background check and a drug test. Local hiring that grows our community with good-paying jobs that have benefits is their mission. Live better, work union, Local 366, feel the power.
Support for this program also comes from the Mid-South Council of Retail, Wholesale, and Department Store Union. Learn more at rwdsu.info.
I'm Attorney Tommy Sinyard. When you've been injured and need help, you need a lawyer who's with you.
Sinyard Law. You need attorneys always available to take care of you. Sinyard Law.
And keep you in the loop. It's your case. You need to know what's happening.
Sinyard Law. And never a charge to meet with us to evaluate your case. Sinyard Law.
A new firm, but an old name. One that will stay with you every step of the way.
Sinyard Law. The name with proven results.
Come on, you poor workers, good news to you I'll tell. How the good old union has come in here to dwell.
Alabama's only union talk radio show. This is the Valley Labor Report. My name is Jacob Morrison, here with my co-host and fellow agitator Adam Keller. We just wrapped up a conversation with Professor Michael Goldfield, author of the book The Southern Key. Fantastic book. Really, a lot of great information in there. Really enjoyed the conversation. Adam, we've got an event coming up in about 10 days, or an event that at least some of us are going to be going to. Talk to us about that.
Yeah, on Wednesday, June 5th at St. Stephen's Music Hall, which is a new venue here in Huntsville, Alabama. That's at 2620 Clinton Avenue West, Campus 805. we're really excited about a collaboration that's happening that evening. The North Alabama School for Organizers, NASO, is organizing a film screening of a documentary called Open Country. It's a film by Glenda Drew and Jesse Drew. The event is free, so if you want to just come on out and have some free entertainment, we will be raising funds for the Valley Labor Report, so we'll be accepting donations and selling merch while we're there. But that's, up to you. You give what you can. We'll appreciate that for sure. We really appreciate High Thurman and NASO for working with us on this and allowing us to raise funds at this event. So Open Country is a journey into the roots of American country music, reclaiming it as the creative musical expression of working people of all colors. Through archival clips, contemporary interviews, performances, and animated graphics, Open Country repositions country music into its rightful place as a people's music. Some of the musicians that you'll hear about include Pete Seeger, Hazel Dickens, Billy Bragg, and lots more. So that night on Wednesday, June 5th, live music starts at 6:30. The film starts at 7, and then after the film will be a little bit of Q&A and some more music. So I'll bring some brief words on behalf of the Valley Labor Report, but then we'll get back to partying. So should be a really great event. I know folks are getting out of school. Folks will be back from their Memorial Day festivities, hopefully. So Wednesday, June 5th, come on out. Great opportunity to connect with folks here in the community and hopefully raise a little bit of money for the Valley Labor Report. Y'all know, those of you who listen regularly, that we're a grassroots media project on a shoestring budget. We raise just enough to break even each month, and really appreciate all of our sponsors and everybody who chips in their individual donations or buys our merch or just, likes and shares and subscribes to our stuff. It really makes a difference, and we appreciate it.
Yep, absolutely. So, Adam, you had a few reflections on the Goldfield interview. A couple other things that you wanted to say.
Yeah, I really appreciate Goldfield's work. I'm still working through the book myself, but it's been, really fascinating, especially the Alabama aspects of it. But something that we didn't really get into was associative power. He mentioned structural power in terms of, coal and steel versus textile, right? Or auto versus retail in a more contemporary sense. That workers, in the auto industry have more structural power than the retail industry. And one way to supplement that is with associative power. And that is through other labor unions, the broader labor movement supporting you, but also linking up with the community, linking up with broader social movements, and building those kind of coalitions. And that sort of associative power he demonstrates in the book has been really instrumental, particularly for workers who don't have as much structural power. And so that's something we didn't really get into much in the interview, but it's a concept that, has really stuck with me, and it's something that I find really important, especially for today's struggles. I kind of sit on the intersection of nonprofits, community, faith, labor, media, do a little bit of all of that. And so I'm kind of a walking coalition, I guess. But I see my role is really trying to facilitate the dialogue there between these different groups and build that associative power. And there was something else that Goldfield wrote in his book. He writes about a choice that union leaders face again and again. Do they rely on the mobilization of the rank and file to engage in the broadest possible struggle with employers, gaining allies from other segments of the working class or the more downtrodden segments of the population, and in the process risking or even undermining the class compromise? Or do they rely on their relations with capitalists and important politicians, using the facts about their industry and the conditions of their constituency, as well as their own reasonableness to compromise, as the basis for winning improvements for their followers? Right? Two different approaches. That broad mass struggle, engaging as many allies as possible, or more the inside approach, top-down approach. This let our leaders be really smart, reasonable folks who can sit down with the big wigs at the companies and the politicians and work out a good deal for us. And we see something you and I were talking about is throughout Goldfield's book, how many times labor leaders just do boneheaded things. I mean, make strategic mistakes. Some of it seems to be, areas of competence or ignorance, but some of it is ideological. And another theme that runs throughout his book is the purging of radicals throughout the movement. And it happened a lot earlier than a lot of folks realize. We've been through multiple Red Scares. Arguably, the first one was after Haymarket in 1886, right? And Goldfield also describes purges of the unions of left-wingers in the 30s, well before McCarthy. And in many cases, these were some of the most talented organizers, some of the most militant and passionate folks, some of the best of the best that they had, who were kicked out of the movement or expelled or isolated. And so you see those kind of blunders that happen throughout the history, because what Goldfield is arguing is that there was the potential to organize the South. And by organizing the South during this time in the 30s and 40s, it would have had a lasting impact on the civil rights struggle of the 50s and 60s, the economic development of the region. I mean, the political dynamics that we face today, right? With the South as kind of like this bastion of reactionary politics. Would that be the case had there been more interracial worker organizing in the 30s and 40s that broke through? So those are some of the questions he wrestles with, and I really appreciate it, and I can't recommend it enough.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. Highly recommend it. I need a couple more minutes for a couple more things to finish editing on Boss Watch. So let's wrap up the program talking about the Public Service Freedom to Negotiate Act, which was put forward in Congress last week. That would, one of the things, and we've talked about this multiple times on the program, that the National Labor Relations Act, and we actually just talked about how, maybe it's not actually the most important thing, but nevertheless, it's not completely worthless, and it's not worth analyzing, right? And so the National Labor Relations Act left out key parts of the working class when it was passed, including farm workers, domestic workers, federal employees, and importantly, for this conversation, public sector employees in state governments and municipal governments. So when the National Labor Relations Act was passed, it left the decision about whether or not those groups of employees are going to have rights to the individual states and municipalities. And so you can obviously imagine that there is a vast and complicated web of public sector labor law in states across the country, from states where collective bargaining is outright banned. It's completely illegal, which is just a fascinating thing, because in places where public sector collective bargaining is illegal, those states are led by political elites who hide behind concepts like freedom and the First Amendment, which includes freedom of association and freedom of speech and all this kind of stuff. That they're all they're universally come from states where the elite class wraps themselves up in that type of rhetoric about freedom, while they ban collective bargaining, while they ban the ability to negotiate, to speak with your employers on equal footings if you are a public sector, state, or municipal employee. It's completely backwards. It is completely antithetical to any real, version of or idea of freedom that one could have. And but I mean, you have to be used to that. If you're a working person in the United States, you should always and universally be extremely skeptical when somebody comes to you talking about how much freedom the government is going to be giving you. That's that you gotta sometimes sometimes the government can give you freedom, and it's good and we should take it. But a lot of times the people who are going around talking about freedom and liberty they want freedom and liberty for the bosses, for the employers, for the people who make money off of money instead of money from labor. So in Congress last week, the Public Service Freedom to Negotiate Act was reintroduced. It has been introduced before. It obviously has not passed, and it obviously will not pass this session. But what the law would do, if passed, is it would basically nullify all of the anti-labor public sector labor laws in the country. So in places like across the South where collective bargaining is banned by statute, or in Alabama where collective bargaining is banned by case law, those laws and those standards would be overturned in favor of a regime where public sector workers have the ability, have the freedom, have the liberty to unionize and to collectively bargain over their wages and working conditions, just like workers in the private sector, and just like employers in the private sector. Public sector, municipal governments, state governments would not be forced to give workers anything. They would not be forced to, have great wages or great benefits if workers unionize. That's something that workers would have to get themselves. They would have to be able to win elections themselves. They would have to be able to use their power to pull down better benefits and better working conditions from state and municipal governments. But it would, it would open avenues to public sector workers that are not available currently. So that's it would be a very big step forward for public sector workers in the country, something that should obviously happen, especially if you care about freedom and liberty and things like this and the First Amendment. And so, I wanted to highlight that, spend a little bit of time talking about that and talking about the situation of public sector workers because of, and try to keep that in the conversation so that hopefully and at some point in the future, we do have a Congress where the public is behind this idea enough that the Congress would pass it, because obviously everybody deserves the right to collective bargaining. Everybody deserves the right to freedom of association, and it should not be impeded just because you work for a state and municipal government. And, obviously, a lot of state and municipal government employees face really unique issues. We covered for a while, right in a row, there was a public sector municipal government fight in Selma, Alabama, where I think, if I'm remembering actually correctly, they went on strike for a few days, where the groundskeepers and lawn maintenance folks, the folks who cut the grass, they were being paid something like $8 an hour. It's and Jacksonville State University. We just finished talking 2 weeks ago. We talked to folks in the United Campus Workers from Jacksonville State University, where some of the people who do the real heavy lifting on campus, who keep the campus clean, who make sure that the grounds are cared for and facilities are kept clean and operational, those folks make $8-9 an hour. It's absolutely unacceptable, and clearing the path for collective bargaining would be, and statutorily granting them that right and saying that states do not have the authority to take that right away would be good, and would be one less obstacle for those workers in their fight to get living wages and get the full value that, or more of the value that they produce for the public. So
yeah, absolutely agree. I mean, because public sector workers so often throughout our country don't have union representation. They have less power to fight back against the corporations and politicians that do the corporate bidding, right? And as they try to privatize and eliminate public services, they're at a disadvantage when it comes to defending not just their own livelihoods, but all of us as the public. So, from where I'm sitting, the ability for these folks to collectively bargain and secure union contracts would actually improve public services. It's going to have higher standards for worker safety and pay and benefits, which then turns into better worker retention. To Professor Goldfield's point earlier, there's less turnover, less training cost, better communication between the workers and their employers. So there's lots of advantages there for all of us to see public sector workers gain the rights that they deserve. And if you're a teacher or a sanitation worker in Alabama, why do you deserve less than a teacher or sanitation worker in California or New York? I don't think you do. So I appreciate the folks who have reintroduced this bill. I'd love to see it be a priority in Congress, understanding that not much is happening there, but we'd love to see this as a priority. And I think it probably will take federal action because we know the dynamics here in the South. They will fight it tooth and nail, but we need changes to public sector labor law. It's essential.
We're going to be heading into the second half of the program. We're going to be talking to Sarah Jaffe, author and journalist, about a recent piece of hers in These Times advocating for a 32-hour work week. We're also going to be talking to her about Mercedes. She was in Tuscaloosa for about a week reporting on that campaign, so we're going to talk to her a little bit about that. We're also going to be taking a look at the latest from IATSE in their Hollywood negotiations and the UAW's strike for Palestine at the University of California. Find us on Facebook and YouTube, where we will continue streaming for another hour and a half, talking about all of that. Otherwise, we'll see you next week. All right, folks, that is that's it for the first half of the program. Like I said, we've got a great second half of the program lined up for you. It's going to be good, so make sure you don't go anywhere. We're going to take a break really quick and be right back for overtime.
Come on, you poor workers, good news to you I'll tell, how the good old union has come in here to dwell.
Welcome back. You are still listening to the Valley Labor Report. My name is Jacob Morrison, here with Adam Keller, broadcasting from the Spice Radio Studios in Huntsville, Alabama. We got a great second half of the program. We got a great overtime lined up for you. Going to be talking about IATSE's Hollywood negotiations. Going to be talking to Sarah Jaffe about her reporting, her thoughts on the Mercedes election. Lots of stuff to talk about. The phone number is 844-899-TVLR if you want to get in on the conversation. Appreciate everybody tuning in and watching us on Facebook and YouTube. Have Mel and Joe in the Facebook chat as always. Have Demand Better World, Jada, Maxwell, Benjo, Dwayne, Reese, Tristan, Huntsville Dim Worker, Jose, and Chill Will in the YouTube chat. Appreciate all of y'all tuning in. Jada earlier in the program said that yesterday was the last day of school in my district. What a year it's been. Solidarity with all the teachers and education workers. Indeed, my wife is now. She works in the school system as something of a support staff. So she's gonna have the summer off. That's gonna be great. Gonna have a dinner and a clean house. Is that, Adam? Your wife is a teacher. Is that what happens during the summer? Sure. When I help, and I appreciate her very much. If she's listening, thank you for all you do. That's right. That's right. Jada also expressed surprise at the cop story in Argentina. Indeed, that was a little surprising. That was kind of bonkers. Yeah. Kind of bonkers. Unfortunately, I hated to do it to him, but I did have to share what was going on in Buenos Aires too, because unfortunately, not all the cops in Argentina are good. So still have bad cops. Reese is on the way to the DSA convention. I didn't even know there was a DSA convention. I wasn't aware. Interesting. What's going on with the DSA convention? Let us know. Let us know how it goes. Huntsville Dim Worker asked to provide the full title of the book. We did that a few times. The book is called The Southern Key, Class, Race, and Radicalism in the 1930s and 40s. It's a great book. It's really, really good. This Memorial Day weekend, let's remember all the innocent lives lost in Gaza and the West Bank. Indeed, the Memorial Day weekend is a really great. It's a great time to remind folks. It's set up to remember folks who have lost their lives in war, and it's a great opportunity to remind folks that it is not necessary. You don't have to have people dying in the war all the time. Yeah, we do have a rally this evening here in Huntsville planned. I know there's demonstrations happening all over the country, so just appreciate everybody standing up. Yep. Heard anything about the NLRB looking for a possible revote at Mercedes? Asked Chill Will. Yes, we have talked about that a little bit during last week in Southern Labor. We're going to be talking about that some more with Sarah Jaffe here in a minute. Huntsville Dim Worker says, now I'm in trouble. No, it's fine. I keep the house clean, and sometimes I make dinner. Typically that's our division of labor. Since when both of us are actually working like full time, the division of labor is typically I do cleaning and she does cooking. That's kind of the informal agreement that we have. So I do cook occasionally though. I cook a mean spaghetti and grilled cheese. I'm really good at cooking grilled cheese. Now I can handle a grilled cheese, yeah. But I do it. Ryan says my grilled cheese is not is not actually a grilled cheese. She says it's just a sandwich that's grilled because I put a little bit of meat on it. Okay, put a little bit of meat on it. I put some bacon on it. I got garlic salt. I have red pepper flakes. I have like 3 or 4 different kinds of cheeses. So see, I like cooking for my 8-year-old because it's pretty straightforward. It's 2 pieces of bread and some cheese grilled, and that impresses her. Yeah, or a can of SpaghettiOs. Can't go wrong with SpaghettiOs. So I can hold it down on that respect. Okay. Nothing too more elaborate than that, though. Reese says it's his local DSA convention. I see.
Cool.
Okay, cool. Jose says, I'm an instructional assistant at a junior high school, and the last day of school was this past Thursday, so I hope to go to UCLA for the UAW 4811 picket line. Very cool.
Nice.
Yeah. Well, let us...
it was the last week of school for a lot of folks here in Alabama as well. So shout out to all the teachers. You survived another one. It's always tough that last week of school because people are getting bad news. They're getting pink slip. They're getting forced transferred to new schools. They're getting their course loads upended. And, so it's always bittersweet at the end of the school year, and then you send the kiddos off and, hope you made a difference. But really appreciate all the educators out there. Take some time for yourself this weekend.
Absolutely. If my voice sounds a little bit different, it's because I got back from Atlanta like a few hours ago. Like, I don't know, it was like 2 o'clock in the morning or something that I got back from Atlanta for Maylene and the Sons of Disaster concert, my first metal concert. Really had a great time. It was a lot of fun. I got a shirt. It's got a really cool possum. They're like a southern metal band. That's kind of their shtick. So yeah, had a good time. A little sore. Got a couple of bruises, I think, from the pit, but had a good time. So before we bring on Sarah Jaffe, Adam, the IATSE has been negotiating with the AMPTP for their Hollywood Basic Agreement, and they have been a little bit more transparent this go around than they were last time. So if you could, Adam, talk to us about the latest on the Hollywood negotiations and why we're getting a little bit more transparency this time.
Sure, yeah. So we're talking about the International Alliance of Theatrical Stage Employees, IATSE, behind the scenes entertainment industry union. And so remember that last year the actors and writers had to go on strike to get a good deal. And of course, while that strike was happening, that put a lot of IATSE members out of work, especially out in the Hollywood area. So negotiations are happening between IATSE and the big studios, the AMPTP. They have completed several weeks of negotiations on the Hollywood Basic Agreement. According to IATSE, the official press release, some of the bargaining topics they've covered included retirement and health benefits, further exchanges around artificial intelligence, wages and working conditions, subcontracting, and some of the other agreements. IATSE's goals during these negotiations remain enhanced contract language covering safety, subcontracting, and working conditions, guardrails around the deployment of new AI technologies, and updated contract terms that ensure economic stability for members and their families. International President Matthew D. Loeb stated, quote, "We are working towards settling additional bargaining dates to continue to negotiate the deal our members deserve. Talks remain ongoing, and we are focused on achieving the goals we came to the table with: improved wages and safer working conditions, consistent funding for our benefit plans, reasonable AI and subcontracting protections, and appropriate enhancements to our videotape agreement and side letters." The Hollywood Basic Crafts, which includes Teamsters Local 399, IBEW Local 40, and Laborers International Union of North America, LIUNA, Local 724, among others, joined the IATSE Basic Negotiating Committee for the benefits portion of the talks last week. And so they are still working on this big Hollywood Master Agreement. They also have the Area Standards Agreement, and those negotiations just started May 20th. The Basic Agreement negotiations are expected to restart in early June. Both agreements expire July 31st, and they report that the negotiating committees are not interested in an expansion. So it's been interesting to see. There were locals involved with the area standards negotiation penned a joint letter with the International and put that out. There have been, some regular bargaining updates coming out, but this comes amid a petition launched by a new and growing reform caucus within IATSE called CREW, Caucus of Rank and File Entertainment Workers. and that was featured in Deadline and some other mainstream media outlets recently. So, the union appears to be making some progress with the big studios, but there is pushback from members. And so members have been circulating a petition urging leadership to agree to updating members regularly with a detailed list of IATSE's local and general proposals, as well as the studio's responses from now until the end of negotiations. So they're calling for more transparency, more information, more communication during these negotiations. And so there does seem to be some discomfort among some rank and file members about how these negotiations are going. And some of that is based on heartburn from the last go round, where a contract that many consider to be not a good contract was ratified with, my understanding was minority support. If I recall correctly, it was kind of a loophole. It was approved without broad popular support. And so there's a lot of, apprehension, I would say, among Hollywood IATSE members about this contract and how things are going to go. So they're calling for more transparency, at least from the Reform Caucus. And the petition says, quote, "Without real changes to the negotiations transparency, we are at risk of getting another undemocratically chosen, unpopular contract." So we will see what happens with this. As I mentioned, the basic agreement and the Hollywood area standards agreements, all this stuff expires July 31st. So we will see what happens this summer with IATSE as they negotiate over in Hollywood and where things shake out with this Reform Caucus. That's been one of the interesting things to watch in the labor movement in the last decade or so, has been the growth of reform caucuses in so many unions. We've seen it with the Teamsters for a Democratic Union and with TDU over in the Teamsters, among other reform caucuses, Teamsters Mobilize and others. Of course, in UAW, we have the UAWD, which propelled Sean Fain to the presidency. But there are other reform efforts in the New York Teachers Union, for example, which has not yet gained power there. And so, a lot of these international unions are facing, kind of bottom-up militant upsurges from within their own membership, pushing for more democracy, more militancy, more transparency, more accountability for leadership. So it will be interesting to see where this plays out, but it's something to keep an eye on because IATSE represents hundreds of thousands of members. Many of them are concentrated out in Hollywood, and the show will not go on without the IATSE stagehands and lighting folks and video folks and audio folks and hair and makeup and wardrobe and just all the different jobs that IATSE members do for the film industry. So, yeah, we'll see. We will see. But wishing all of my fellow members of IATSE a successful contract, and appreciate all of those who are pushing for more democracy and more militancy and pushing for a stronger, more vibrant union, because ultimately our strength comes from our membership.
Steve in the chat said that IATSE is also negotiating the Area Standards Agreement currently. The Area Standards Agreement, is that what would that be? Is that another Hollywood thing, or is that a...
Yeah, there's two negotiations going on. There's like the Hollywood Master Agreement, and then there's the Area Standards Agreements. And I'm not exactly sure all the distinctions of what's covered in what. What I do know is they both expire July 31st. And they started with the Master Hollywood contract first, and now they have opened up area negotiations, but I don't know how much progress they've made.
Gotcha. Steve said that Local 600 and 700, presumably of IATSE, said in July that either there's going to be an agreement or strike authorization. Jose said that Teamsters Local 399 is part of these negotiations as well. And Steve also said that the problem with crew is they're not organized, and the people who are being the loudest don't understand the process enough to actually make changes. Yeah, that's kind of the that's kind of the way that some of these things go, especially in the early days. I was, I think that some of these, a lot of times, some of the people that are going to be the most discontent sometimes are going to be, kind of greenhorns who are like discontent because like they have kind of an idea of what a union should be like, and then what they're actually seeing is not matching up with that. And so, even though they're kind of green or, whatever, they've got these ideas, but they haven't been in it long enough to actually know how to do it. And that is why it's so important and beneficial to have folks who have been in the union for a while who are also discontented as a part of these reform efforts, so that, you can kind of figure out like, okay, what are the, what's actually going on in these negotiations, and, how much of these processes are important and can be changed, or should we just throw them away like wholesale? It's really important for reform movements to have, to build, Steve's saying you need, some of them are trying to sprint before they crawl, and, it's important to kind of, to do the crawling and kind of get your legs under you. But, I think, I don't know how much it could be that that what's the amount of transparency that we're getting now, which is more than last year. I'm sure that part of it is crew, and I'm sure that also part of it is just the general expectations from the Teamsters negotiations and from the UAW's negotiations of this enhanced transparency. So I'm sure there's some of it internally from crew, and also like these are very public, these are very public and important negotiations, and these other unions have set the standard that like you can't just go into a room with the bosses and come out 6 months later with a contract and expect everybody to be okay with that.
Right. Yeah, and I can't speak too much in terms of crew and what's been going on there. I've met a few of the brothers and sisters there at Labor Notes, but haven't had in-depth chats yet, and look forward to learning more about what they're about and what they're trying to accomplish, and what their plan to win is, what their strategy is all about. I agree with your broader observation. Again, I can't speak to if it applies here in this situation, but having intergenerational diversity and diversity of experiences, because you need those like brand new militant folks who come in and things don't match their expectations. But to your point, you need those people who have been around for a while and maybe have even been in leadership before, and have seen what things look like on other sides. Having those perspectives is very helpful. I mean, Sean Fain was part of negotiations under the old regime at UAW, right? He had been on the inside, so he wasn't just a complete outsider. Right. I think those are things you have to be intentional about when you're building a movement from the bottom up. Yeah.
Steve says he's a local 600 IATSE in Atlanta, and an active
great.
member. So I don't know how long you've been listening, Steve, but Adam is also an IATSE member, local 900 in Huntsville. Feel free to call in 844-899-TVLR. That is 844-899-8857. If you'd like to talk to us some more about those negotiations, be interested in hearing your perspective. We have on the line now Sarah Jaffe, a freelance labor journalist and author of Work Won't Love You Back. Sarah, welcome to the program.
Good morning.
Good morning. So it's kind of bonkers that we have not had you on the program before, but glad we could finally make it happen. In these times reached out to me because they were asking if you could come on to talk about the 32-hour workweek article, and that's initially why we were planning on getting you on. But obviously the Mercedes election just happened. You spent a week down, almost a week, something like that, in Tuscaloosa for the election. I was not able to spend a week in Tuscaloosa. I wasn't able to spend that much time talking to workers at the plant, especially no voters. Every time I've been in Tuscaloosa, I've been at the hall. So it's, I'm always talking to the pro-union folks, and you've been able to talk to some more of the folks who voted no. So, I guess first thoughts, some of your thoughts almost or a little over a week out from the results, and then we can kind of talk about some of the latest with the NLRB's announcement yesterday.
Yeah, I mean, first thoughts, my first thoughts were just like being very sad. My a week on thoughts are kind of, there were a couple of Chattanooga workers from the Volkswagen plant who had come down to support the Mercedes workers in the back of the room. And I was sitting near them when the vote was coming in. And I was just like, they were just like, it's good for a first try.
Yeah.
And I think that, we really have to remember, and I mean, I don't think you and I need that much reminding that people in the South don't have the same culture of unions that you do in Detroit or in New York or Los Angeles, right? That there's a real, there's no experience of what it can actually mean to be in a union, and that when the union busting campaign turns on, it's like, it's aggressive. It's always aggressive. You and I could fill out a bingo card of everything that the company was going to say and do, right? Bring in a new CEO, check. Captive audience meetings, check. Identify the leaders and try to turn them, check. Like, we know what they're going to do. But are you giving people a strong enough reason, not only to like know what they're going to do, not only, doing enough inoculation, but like a strong enough reason to really say like, no, we're going to push through all this and really fight to have this union here. And, a lot of the workers were saying, right, that like after the stand-up strike, they had an easier lift getting people to see that they might want a union. But have people really learned how hard you're going to have to fight for this and started to see maybe that like how hard the boss is fighting you is the reason you need the union? And I don't know if we're connecting those dots for people yet, because like, it's rough. It's hard out there. I was just talking to folks here. I'm in New Orleans about the death of the anti-union bills in the state legislature last week. And like, mostly it happened because the guys who are writing the anti-union bills don't know how unions work because they don't have enough experience with them either. But yeah, we're sort of up against like, people don't know anything a lot of the time, because how would they? I didn't know anything when I was, 19 years old either. And so, and I wouldn't have had I not, grown up in Boston listening to angry pro-union punk rock and, read some Marxist history.
Right.
So most people don't end up like me.
Yeah.
So how are we actually, how are unions, how is the UAW, how are other unions thinking about like building that culture once again that is just, it was not that long ago that it was strong in Alabama, but it's been so thoroughly sort of crushed out of the public eye.
Yeah, we just finished talking to Goldfield, spent 45 minutes talking to him about that. And it really is, it is interesting how thoroughly it seems like the consciousness of our history has been beaten out of us, because, and he made this remark in a private conversation with us, and then he said it again on the air about how in West Virginia during the teachers' strikes and those struggles in 2017 or whatever, there was a lot of callback to history. They were wearing red bandanas to pay homage to their grandfathers who were coal miners, and they were saying, we're in this tradition very clearly. We know our history. We are part of our history. And like, that's just not in Alabama, even though Alabama has just as legitimate a claim to that history that West Virginia does. And it's interesting that has happened, and I really don't have any theories about how it is that happened, because there are more union members in Alabama than there are in West Virginia right now. We have a higher union density rate than West Virginia. Our coal mines are still unionized. West Virginia's coal mines are not union by and large anymore. So I don't know if you have any thoughts about those differences between West Virginia and Alabama with respect to
yeah.
the
Well, I
history,
mean, I'm thinking about Wisconsin, right? Wisconsin in 2011. That like one of the reasons that there was this massive uprising across the state to try to save public sector unions, which is, it sounds like a nerdy thing to most people, right? This guy in Louisiana again couldn't figure out how to write legislation to actually kill them properly. Wisconsin teaches labor history in schools. That was such a big part of why that uprising was so big. And like, yeah, there's this really successful attempt to crush public schools in so many places. But also, I just think about like when people have just had that beaten out of them, sort of literally, very literally in some cases, you have to do a lot more to build it back up. I was saying, I think when we were both still down there, that like, okay, normally you count on like you want to file with 70% because you're going to lose 20%. Well, we might have to count on losing 40% in somewhere like Alabama, in somewhere like Louisiana. That because there's not that. One of the things I found really interesting, I'm sorry, I'm kind of rambly this morning, was sitting there with a couple of the workers and one of when they were doing these journalist roundtables with some of the union supporters. And they were saying, so one of the journalists asked, like, do you have family members who are union members? And both of them were like, no. And then they were like, well, yes, actually. Like, my dad was in a union. And it was like that. It was not even conscious, even though, like, your dad was in a union. And I think, one of these questions is like, it's not only that people are not in unions anymore, it's that like the unions that they're in are not building that kind of intense culture that they used to. I'm going to be that terrible, obnoxious person. I've got like galleys of my new book behind me, but there's a chapter that I wrote on deindustrialization in that. And I was talking to people who had been coal miners in England and like how the mine and the union were at the center of everything you did, right? It wasn't just like you were in a union at work and then you went home and you had this totally separate life. Everybody in the town was in the union. Everybody in the town worked in the mine some way. You went to the pub that was owned by the union. You went to, your kids played football on the pitch that was paid for by the union. You buried your family, your dad, when he died, his funeral was at the union hall, right? It was at the miners' welfare. This entire world that unions built, that meant that when Margaret Thatcher went to crush the unions, entire towns fought for them. And like, look, Maggie Thatcher succeeded, but like, we don't even have that anymore. And so 2 generations out from the end of that, people sort of don't remember it. And like, some of the pro-union workers were reading Robin Kelly's Hammer and Hoe, which made me very happy because I love that book. But like, in that interim between the moments of, Communist Party organizing and radical organizing across the South and now, the unions that have hung on in the South have kind of had that fortress unionism mentality. And they're not building a thing that anybody else can see.
Right.
And that's not just true in the South, by the way, it's true in a lot of places, right? And so, what is that sort of step of like, not only we're building strong unions on the shop floor, but we're building strong unions that like everybody in town knows that the union is fighting for all of us, not just for the workers at the Mercedes plant, the VW plant, the mine,
right,
the Amazon warehouse.
Yeah, it's it's a project, and hopefully, if it is the case that one of the real big missing ingredients is more serious labor history in schools, then our labor council is going to be making some strides on that. We have Adam's been leading a high school campaign where we're putting union members in classrooms and talking about labor history, and
I love it.
So maybe in 10 years in Huntsville we'll have a bunch of people wearing red bandanas. But
I love it.
Lord
no,
willing,
that's great.
Yeah, Lord willing. So, the NLRB announced yesterday that the UAW had filed objections to the election. and they are asking for a rerun. And I expressed to you the day before, I think it was, that I was very nervous about the potentiality of a CMEX ruling of the NLRB trying to impose a bargaining order. Which maybe might even sound kind of like a hot take for some folks, that I would not want the NLRB to impose a bargaining order. But you know, I think I even had some questions about, like, is even asking for a rerun the right call, or should you just in a year go for a new election? You know, like, what do you, I'm not sure. But I'm sure that they've thought about that, and I'm sure they've talked to the workers about that, and it seems like, you know, they feel convinced that the right thing is a rerun. But I am glad that there's not a pursuit of a bargaining order at this time. But, you know, I have my reasons, but it seemed like you were, you know, you kind of concurred with my hesitation about a CMEX ruling in this case. So why would you think that it would be bad if the NLRB issued a bargaining order to Mercedes, even though they very clearly, and we know they very clearly violated the law, and legally it would not be unwarranted. So from a legal perspective, a CMEX ruling would not be unwarranted here. But, you know, it's the politically is what I'm concerned about, you know, politically in the kind of broadest sense. Like, anyway, so why would you be concerned about such a ruling?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. There's one of the reasons that, like, card check has been so hard to get right in this country is, like, people are really invested in the, you know, possibility and the promise of elections, which, you know, I mean, I don't know how you can be at this point in time, considering the first election that I could vote in was George W. Bush's presidential election. The first one, you know, the one they stole in Florida, as opposed to the second one that they stole in Ohio. So, like, I have no faith in secret ballot elections to do anything. But a lot of people really believe strongly in their vote mattering. And, like, again, particularly kind of in the South, where a lot of people had to fight to get access to the vote. Overruling it doesn't necessarily feel like a great move. And, like, especially because I didn't talk to that many no voters, but we, you know, spoke with Jane Slaughter from Labor Notes, and she was there to hang it out in the parking lot talking to no voters. And a lot of them seem to have been convinced more by the carrots than the sticks. You know what I mean? Where people were saying, like, oh, well, we've got this new CEO, let's give him a chance. And in that case, like, it doesn't seem like, because it's not, unfortunately, illegal for companies to bring in a new CEO in the middle of a union election, right? That's not an unfair labor practice. Right. So they're perfectly allowed to do that, which is why they always do it. You know, even Walmart brought in a new CEO after there were, you know, minority strikes in a minority of Walmarts in a minority of states in the country. And they brought in a new CEO who had been supposedly, you know, brought up from the rank and file. So, like, if that's the case, and if people were convinced to, like, give Mercedes one more chance, maybe, and say it's one more chance, based on this new CEO and his charm offensive, rather than, like, they were terrified. If that's the truth, then, like, overruling it by saying, like, no, the workers are too terrified, like, it tells those workers that they don't know their own mind. You know?
Right.
And, like, I think, you know, you have a chance, as, you know, Rick Webster said to me right after the vote, he's like, you know, all right, the new CEO's got a chance now to, you know, prove the people who gave him another chance right. And, you know, they'll swing away from the union, or they will find out that nothing's going to change and they'll swing back toward the union. And I think, you know, the challenge now is, like, I don't think this new CEO is going to change anything fundamentally. But also the challenge is also to sort of say, like, if he does, it's also because of the threat of the union.
Right.
And so, you know, you know, Sean Fain rightly sort of said in his, you know, his speech after the vote, like, you know, they got the UAW bump, they got a raise, and they got the end of two-tier because they were organizing.
Right.
They didn't get that because a company woke up one morning and decided to be nice. And they got this new CEO because they were organizing, not because the company woke up one morning and decided we're going to put a nicer guy in charge of the Mercedes plant in Vance, you know?
Right. Exactly. So yeah, we'll be following the campaign for a rerun election. I guess do you have any thoughts on that tact on trying to pursue a rerun election through the NLRB? Maybe more quickly than they could secure another election. You know, I mean, you have to wait a year before you can do just a standard clean, do cards and do the whole thing over again. You got to wait a year. Mm-hmm. I mean, do you think with this new NLRB that they could potentially secure an election more quickly? And then if they could, would that be good to have another election in 3 months?
Well, talking about my general dread of elections, like, you know what's looming in November, right? Mm-hmm. So, you know, maybe they want to get another election in with a board that isn't completely run by fascists. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. Because, you know, in a year from now, who the hell knows what we're going to be looking at, you know, with a federal government that looks more like the state governments in the places that you and I live. What are we going to be looking at in a year versus what are we going to be looking at in, you know, August, September? I imagine that that's on everybody's mind because I think, you know, the UAW in particular knows that like Biden's policies are a thing that helped give them leverage in the Big Three strike, you know, not to take anything away from their, you know, tactics and organizing, but like, does GM agree to put battery plant workers on a master agreement if Biden isn't promising more subsidies for electric vehicles?
Right. Yeah,
you know,
that's a good point.
They're real things that we have to, you know, sort of be aware of.
Yeah, and I hadn't even thought of, you know, I had been thinking of the election in terms of like, oh, if Trump wins and the NLRB issued a bargaining order, that would be the end of the NLRB. But I wasn't thinking, I hadn't put the other together about how a rerun could potentially be more. So you would have some more structural advantages under a Biden NLRB than a Trump NLRB, and thus the impetus for a quick rerun. I think that makes sense. So, go ahead.
Yep.
So, your article on a 32-hour work week came out in These Times a while back, and that is that's something that, you know, speaking of Sean Fain and the UAW, they have kind of really pushed into the fore. It's not the first time that a 32-hour work week has been discussed in the United States, and certainly not nationally or internationally, and so. You know, the title of your article, if I'm remembering correctly, was a 32-hour work week is ours if we take it, or something along those lines. And so, you know, what is it that you think gives you optimism about the potential for winning a 32-hour work week?
Well, I mean, you know, journalists don't get to choose their headlines very often. But I think, and this is actually connects to what I was saying, right, about this, the lack of culture of unionism and the lack of recognition that unions are a vehicle for fighting for the entire working class, demands like a shorter working week with no loss in pay, right? It's important to stress that part. Those are things that are unifying across sort of broad swaths of the workforce. Like, oh, actually work sucks and we don't want to do as much of it. You know, when we were talking to the workers at Mercedes, time was their number one issue over and over and over again. Everybody was talking about forced overtime, this 6-day week rotating schedule, right? Where they work 6 days on, 2 days off.
You want to know something really, really quick, and then I'll give it back to you. But it's just so funny. There's this conservative radio host who was talking about, like, oh, you know, here's maybe some of the reasons that the UAW lost at Mercedes, and he literally listed one of the reasons that workers at Mercedes voted against the union is because the UAW wants a 32-hour work week. And that's why they voted against the union. I mean, you know, the idea, because the time has been such a, you know, it's not even, you hear some about the pay, but a lot of it is really the time. I spend too much effing time at work and I want to spend time at home. And then this, you know, just absolute fool, you know, I mean, you know, he doesn't know anything about really very much, but particularly about labor. And so it's a very funny juxtaposition, his assertions with reality.
Well, like, if you think about that, right? Like this idea that, do you remember what's his face, the lieutenant governor of Texas during COVID saying like, oh, well, grandparents will be happy to die so that everybody else can go back to work. Right. And it's like, my dude, no. Most people do not want to go back to work, actually. We've seen these waves of sort of trend pieces about the Great Resignation and quiet quitting. It turns out that work is bad, actually. Somebody should write a book about that. Oh, wait. And like, this it's interesting because, when I was writing that book, I was thinking about, when I was writing Work Won't Love You Back, I was thinking about the change from mostly industrial labor to mostly service labor, caring labor, the quote unquote knowledge economy that, you and I theoretically work in, that like, what is the change here? And one of the changes is that nobody expects you to love working on cars for 12 hours a day, right? Nobody expected those guys to sit down and be like, yeah, man, I really love putting wiring harnesses in the front end of a Mercedes every day. No. Right. And so it always sounds a little bonkers when people try to apply that language back to like industrial labor, like, oh, the workers love working 6 days in a row, driving 2 hours each way and being there for 12 hours. And then, they love that. It's great. That's what they would love to be doing with their day. Of course not. But actually, it's moving back in the other direction too, where, people who are supposed to love our jobs, we're also saying like, maybe there are better things I could do with my day than, sit in front of a laptop for 12 hours. She says, while having sent messages to people yesterday, being like, the workers are great and I love my job, but I still want to do less of it. And like this move towards shorter hours again, right? It was a key demand of the labor movement for literally hundreds of years, right? Starting in like the Industrial Revolution. People were like, oh, this is terrible. I don't want to do so much of it. How do we get out of that? Fight for a 12-hour day, fight for a day off, fight for 2 days off, fight for a 10-hour day, then fight for the 8-hour day. And somehow we got stalled there. And the last time that like a 32-hour week was sort of seriously discussed in this country at higher levels was in leading up to World War II, right? In the Great Depression, when it was a way to spread out the amount of work among more workers. It's like less work, then you can hire more people, then everybody is A, less exhausted, and B, more people are getting paid. So you don't have as many people who are flat broke and trying to figure out how to eat. Basic things. And like Dean Baker brought up shorter working hours during the Great Recession in 2008, 2009, saying, once again, this would be a good way to do things. Germany actually did it. And, I don't really love saying nice things about the Germans, especially because we've just been talking about Mercedes. But the way that, especially with automation, especially with, AI, although the AI is telling people to eat rocks or something these days, so I'm not too worried about it taking my job. But
that's not an exaggeration, Adam. Adam is not.
No, it really is not an exaggeration.
If you Google right now, how many rocks should I eat? Google's AI is recommending at least one per day. One rock.
Yeah, it's great. And then like putting glue in your sauce.
That explains.
You saw the glue one, right?
I haven't been taking my rock a day. Damn
yeah, exactly. You got to get those minerals, man. I heard about, vitamins and minerals.
This show is going to be lit once I start my rock diet. Just wait, y'all.
Exactly. So, right, this like, the robots are not exactly an immediate threat to my job. But like, what if we had robots who could do the annoying parts of my job? We do have good robot transcription now. I don't have to transcribe my own interviews as much anymore. Cool. Right. Okay. That's like less work that I have to do. What if we actually thought about this in all these different forms of labor? Okay, cool. You got robots. Cool. That means we have to work less rather than you got robots. So now you've got to work at the speed of the robot, right? Where like the Amazon warehouses where they've got the robots have a higher injury rate than the ones where they don't, because the robots don't slow down and the robots don't stop and the robots don't get hurt. And, the other thing that Rick Webster said to me in Alabama that has really stuck with me, he's like, you take a job in an auto plant, you think you're going to be an assistant to a robot, but actually you're the robot. And who wants to be a robot?
Right.
But if the robots can actually take our jobs, cool, they can have some of mine and I can have more time off to go hang out in the park and read a book.
Exactly.
That's not written by AI.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, I've always felt that this fear is overblown in terms of like, oh my God, drudgery will be taken away from us. Like,
oh no.
Okay. Well, I mean, and it's like, the question is about the ownership and who benefits and who owns these robots and the AI, right? It's not so much that, I mean, if drudgery is taken away by machinery, that's great. That's one less thing we have to deal with. It's just who benefits from that, and do we actually get that benefit from it? Or like you said, do we have to just keep up with the robots? And I think that's a really essential question that is often lost in like the popular conversations around this stuff.
Yeah, and there's a long history of sort of radicals within the UAW challenging things like the speed up, right? As like new tech gets brought in, 60s and 70s, right? You have organizing in Detroit, you have like the League of Revolutionary Black Workers, you have the workers at Lordstown with their wildcat strikes, right? Because like the company brings in new tech and all of a sudden you got to do 100 cars an hour. And like, that's exhausting. And so what does it look like to actually, reopen fighting over the work process, which is a whole other story that we could talk about for 3 hours. And, I could kick the corks with Walter Reuther around for a little while. But like, also just to think about like, what if work isn't actually the be all and end all of our lives? What if there are other things? Sean Fain says, we want to live to work, or we want to work to live, not live to work, as I screw it up.
Right.
It's exactly right. And like, I personally think that this is one of those issues that has so much potential to unite folks. It's remarkable how close we came to this during the New Deal, and to think that, like you said, we just kind of stalled out right there. And here it is 70, 80 years later, and we're still stuck. But I think it is an issue that resonates, because in any campaign I've dealt with, covered and volunteered for, etc., time is always the recurring theme. I mean, yes, you hear about pay and healthcare and things like that, but time has like been the most common thing I've heard discussed among teachers, among auto workers, among bus manufacturers, among custodians, like, you name it. Pretty much any worker I've ever talked to in my organizing career, the time has been like the thing that really weighs upon them, that eats at them, that bothers them, and impacts their family the greatest. And so I think this is really one of those issues that has a lot of potential for folks.
And Sarah, you mentioned that this idea it's really kind of entered the zeitgeist as far as like we work too much. 32-hour work week, it has to an extent, but the idea since COVID has really broken through just generally without much more to it, that we work too much. I wanted work less. But even in organizing battles before that, I saw these themes come up with the Warrior Met strike in 2021, which was wasn't 2021 before COVID?
No, it was after COVID.
Damn. That's crazy.
It's all.
But I mean,
well, no, never mind.
Retail workers, right? Like one of the things that, I wrote about Emeryville, California, is like sort of, sane scheduling bills, right? This is also a thing in New York. Starbucks workers, one of the things everybody would talk about was like clopenings, right? Where you got to close the store down at like 11 o'clock at night and then be right back in at 6 a.m. or 5 a.m. or whatever the hell time Starbucks opens to open it back up again. And like with retail, right, it's on call shifts. It's all of these ways that you don't have control over your time. It's happening in hospitals, right? One of the reasons that nurses are always fighting for safe staffing is also long hours. And you just don't want to, I don't know about you, but if I have to go to the hospital, I want the nurses and the doctors to be like well rested that are working on me. I don't want them to be at the tail end of a 14-hour shift because they're going to be more likely to screw up if they're exhausted. That this culture, I mean, speaking of doctors, like the, committee of interns and residents, this is a huge issue for organizing interns, because like physicians who are starting out are expected to work these insane 20-something hour shifts. And like, that's not good for anyone.
Right.
On what planet is that useful to like force people to work, force doctors who have to make, important decisions about that are life and death every day to work 22 hours in a row? Like, that's nuts. Right. But we've got this, like these cultures and these places that you have to like pay your dues. We've got, particularly since COVID, where you got sort of, because you had so many people out sick, you would have people just forced to work longer. And now that you have fewer people going out sick, maybe, although, not like COVID's gone, but you have people pushed to work that long because the company just sort of realized they could do it. And like, there's a reason that like Marx wrote that like God, I wish I could quote it offhand. I really can't. But the main struggle has always been the struggle over the length of the working day, because the best way for the boss to wring more surplus labor out of you is just make you work longer every day.
Right.
And like, this is, this is sort of a central battle that American unions have largely abandoned. And it's been sort of think tank people and politicians, right? Mark Takano introduced a 32-hour bill several years ago now, and Bernie Sanders has now introduced a similar one in the Senate. Like, but we haven't been seeing it led so much by a big union, and particularly we haven't seen a big union putting it in a demand that led to a strike. And so even though, it was sort of obviously going to be a bargaining chip this time around, like they obviously weren't going to get it. Right. I think it's important to keep talking about it. I think it's important that they keep talking about it. It's important that like the Postal Workers Union, which is, I believe, the biggest collective bargaining contract in the country, is pushing forward on this and is leading on this issue. There's another place where automation has become a huge issue, but also where COVID was a huge issue, right? Because who kept working and who did so much more work during COVID when we were all ordering way too much shit on the internet? That would be your postal workers. And so seeing this, as a labor issue once again, and not just an issue that's going to be like handed down from above from nice politicians or nice bosses who sign up for these 32-hour week trials, which are great. And I, think it's exciting that people are doing that. But actually, in order to win it, we're going to have to sort of win it, as we have had to win anything that's good for workers ever. And, and the fight's not going to be easy, but I think it's really, really important for labor to think about all of these issues that transcend one particular workplace, right? Again, it's a way to say to people, like, actually, the union winning this is sort of good for everyone.
Right.
One of the things that Sean Fain did following the stand-up strike was call for unions to align their contract for May 1st, 2028. Our Labor Council is part of an effort to get labor councils across the country to take up that, to answer that call, to encourage their affiliates to answer that call. Over the course of talking to people about this, somebody asked me, and it was an interesting question. Somebody asked me, for what? What is the thing that we're aligning our contracts? And, I understand, I'm a unionist. I understand that we have more leverage together, in 2028, it would be beneficial. What are we, is there a demand yet for 2028? And, there's not at this point. It's just a call to pool, to use the leverage that we have and make the most use of it that we can. But the UAW has not put forward, this is going to be a strike for a 32-hour work week, and neither have the labor councils that are part of the independent effort to push this to our affiliates. And so I thought that was an interesting question, as and interesting in how do you come to a demand in 2028? I think a 4-day work week seems like an obvious one, but would it be appropriate for the UAW and the half a dozen or so labor councils that are leading this effort to decide that's going to be the issue in 2028, or do we try to it's kind of like a chicken and the egg, can we actually convince unions and workers to align contracts for 2028 if we don't have a message first or a goal? But if we create a goal right now, it's not exactly very democratic because, definitionally people aren't on board yet. We're trying to get people on board yet. So, what are your thoughts about that? Should should people that are doing this right now, should we be putting forward, align your contracts for a 32-hour work week in 2028, or should we be kind of leaving that to discussions and debates in 2027, 2028?
This is a really, really interesting point, actually, I think, when you think about these kinds of things. So I was just rereading Jane McAlevy's first book, where she talks about her experience running the SEIU healthcare local in Las Vegas and working on getting all of the hospitals in town lined up. But that makes a lot of sense when you think about it, because it's all the hospitals in the same union, and you're trying to get all the nurses, all the hospital workers in one town to have like the same pay rates, right? That makes sense. Great. That's an easy one. When you're thinking about like lining up all your contracts, but you have a bunch of different kinds of unions, the most recent place I've seen people do this is in Minneapolis this spring. And in March, a bunch of unions and community organizations lined up their deadlines for the same date, around the same date, the same week, basically. And the thing that was interesting with that, right, is that like some of the unions settled, some of the unions walked. So you have this potential for like, I don't remember how many thousand workers, 15,000 workers or something like that, to be on strike at the same time. And that was across 2 school districts. It was across public and private sector. It was all of these different types of workers thinking about their particular demands in their particular workplaces. But also there are sort of common pillars, right, that they're talking about: good housing, good schools, good wages, and the climate crisis. And unions have different ways that they can fight on each of these issues, right? Like some of the parks workers in Minneapolis have like climate issues that are very obvious to them, whereas like teachers may seem like it's less obvious. But we've seen, we've watched bargaining for the common good campaigns where people include all sorts of things in their bargaining that are not necessarily and not technically legally, subjects of bargaining. And so I think there's something powerful to be learned in the question of sort of loose demands, right? About loose alignments that say like, okay, all of you can have your strikes, your deadlines looming, and some companies will settle. And okay, what does that look like? What is your sort of obligation to that if you're all aligning your contract expiration and then your boss comes to you at, say, again, parks workers local in wherever you might be, and says, we're going to give you the best contract you've ever seen. Well, your workers are probably going to take it, right? To like have sort of internal union democracy, you've got to have the ability for those workers to take the deal, right? If they want the deal. But also, that leverage alone, just the possibility of like, oh my God, citywide strike, everything is snarled up for, a week, 2 weeks. That alone, it gives you power. And aligning around some big top line issues that like everybody can understand what they are seems really helpful. But like, right, you have this challenge of like, unions are accountable to their members, and their members are in a specific workplace and have specific conditions that they're fighting for. And also, what does it look like to think about this as a working class movement that wants to fundamentally change the division of power in our screwed up society?
Right. By way of wrapping up, you've alluded to your previous book, Work Won't Love You Back,
yes.
And how there's this kind of weird propaganda around why everybody should love their job, you should love the drudgery, you should love all of this kind of stuff, and you should sacrifice yourself at the altar of capital. That's the good moral thing to do. And you've got a new book book coming out as well. So, what are some of the things that we've been talking about today and that are just generally, kind of relevant to folks listening that folks would take away from reading those books?
Work is bad, actually. Capitalism is also bad, and it wants you dead. And I'm only sort of joking because this book up here is about grief. And one of my big theses is just kind of capitalism wants you dead and can't really, as it's built, see us as anything other than those robots that the Mercedes workers were talking about. So to actually think about, again, fundamentally changing the division of power in this screwed up society, how do we think about being human, I guess, is the sort of this obnoxious thread between these two books is like, actually, we live in a world that is not designed for human life. It is designed, or non-human life, to be fair. And it's making us completely miserable and telling us that there's something wrong with us if we're completely miserable. And actually, in the recent book, I sort of latch onto Walter Benjamin's suggestion that revolution is actually grabbing for the emergency brake. It's putting a stop to the way that the world chews us up and spits us out. And from that kind of position, how do we imagine something else?
Right.
I like that. I like that a lot. And before we let you go, I also wanted to give you a chance to mention your podcast as well, in case folks are curious about that.
Yeah, well, I'm technically now the host of two podcasts, one of which is called Belabored, which is a labor podcast that is currently on hiatus, but I swear we're coming back soon. And you can find all of the back episodes at dissentmagazine.org/belabored. And then just to be fun, my friend and I just started a lefty advice podcast. So if you're interested and have questions about various and sundry things, we will give you advice. It's called Heart Reacts, and you can find that wherever you find podcasts.
That sounds really interesting. Okay. We sometimes get solicited for advice, so we'll be sure to share those with you.
All right.
Sarah Jaffe, freelance journalist, author, Work Won't Love You Back, and other books. Thank you very much. Appreciate your time.
Thank you.
So, lots of other stuff to talk about today. We have, at least one other thing to talk about, and that is, the big political topic right now in the news is obviously what's going on in Gaza and Palestine, the assault by the Israeli government, and it's something that the labor movement has, to its credit, kind of broken with its own history in coming out in defense of human rights internationally and supporting a ceasefire, however tepid that support is. That is the position of the mainstream, of the vast majority of workers, of unions representing the vast majority of union workers in this country. And in an escalation of that support, UAW Local 4811 at the University of California has gone on strike, broadly supportive of, Palestine and in opposition to the, the attacks by Israel on the Gaza Strip, but specifically for the free speech rights of their members and their communities on college campuses and at the University of California college campuses, where the police have been called to repress the protests in the communities. And, so Adam, I gave you some homework to do a little bit more reading than I had time to do about this, about, the 4811's, their struggles with the university. So, walk us through some of the last few weeks at the University of California as it relates to the protests and the system's response, the University of California system's response to those protests.
Yeah, so I wanted to first just distinguish that this is an unfair labor practices strike. There's different things that prompt strikes. Most people are familiar with strikes happening when a contract has expired, like the UAW's Big Three stand-up strike. But in this case, this is a strike over unfair labor practices that the union has charged the University of California system with, doing. And so there has been, as most listeners know, a growing movement of protest around college campuses all over the country in opposition to the genocide in Palestine and in opposition to the American role in that genocide and the support of Israel with our tax dollars. And so the University of California system has cracked down hard on the protest encampments. They have used the police. In one instance, there were, counter-protesters who were allowed to just kind of run rampant on the pro-Palestinian side. That was allowed to occur for several hours before intervention. And so basically where we're at now is we've had walkouts at UCLA and UC Davis. UAW represents about 48,000 academic workers in this local, so that's, quite a lot of folks spread out throughout the University of California system. Now, the administration is alleging that this is an illegal strike. They filed at the state labor board seeking an injunction to immediately stop it. But the state labor board, and again, these are public sector workers who fall under California's public sector union rules, not the National Labor Relations Board, but the California board said that the university's complaint did not meet its legal standard required for intervention. They didn't make a real determination one way or the other. They didn't say, you're in the clear, UAW, and this is perfectly legal what you're doing. But they also didn't say, you're right, Mr. University President, this is totally illegal. So they didn't intervene. So it appears the strike strategy is very much like in the stand-up strike vein of how UAW handled the big three auto manufacturers. Rather than everyone walking out all at once, it's going to be a lot more strategic, and folks will walk out at various places at various times, which obviously keeps the management on their toes, right? Because they're not exactly sure where it's going to occur, when things are going to happen. And so it kind of adds a layer of chaos to the whole situation. But the union that's on strike, UAW 4811, they represent, like I said, 48,000 folks. It includes various university workers, including graduate student teaching assistants, tutors, researchers, and various academic workers at both UC campuses and the Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory. And it's also interesting because this happens at the end of the academic year, right? As the classes are ending, your final projects are being turned in, final papers are being turned in, grading is being completed. And so it's going to have a big impact on the final, days of the semester, right? And it's going to impact students across the system. So the university says it's an illegal strike. The state labor board has not made a determination. They certainly haven't intervened to stop the strike yet. The strike began last Monday at UC Santa Cruz. And so it's going to be different times, different colleges across the 10 campuses. The legality of the strike remains up in the air for at least probably 3 more weeks. So we'll see, what plays out over the next few weeks. The union says that UC, the University of California system, has had many chances to resolve its egregious unfair labor practices and has thus far refused to engage. Now 2 more campuses are walking out. And so that was UCLA and UC Davis. Basically, the unfair practice that is being alleged here is that workers' free speech rights were violated when the system leaders called the police to remove the pro-Palestinian demonstrators. And like I said, at UCLA, when they were not protected from an attack by pro-Israel supporters for several hours. And you've had hundreds of arrests, including some members of UAW, have been impacted directly by these arrests. A majority of the union did vote to authorize a strike, which could last all the way until June 30th, potentially. And it was a pretty strong majority, well over 70%, if I recall correctly, voted to authorize the strike. The union is demanding that UC officials negotiate with the pro-Palestinian demonstrators, stop actions hostile towards nonviolent activists, grant amnesty to those facing disciplinary action related to the unrest, and divest from, quote, weapons manufacturers, military contractors, and companies profiting from Israel's war on Gaza. Now, the university says that this is illegal because there's a no strike clause in the union contract. And they also said that basically this is a political strike and not actually a labor strike. But again, the union points to violations of free speech rights, freedom of assembly and association rights, and the arrest and other, crackdowns on dissent that has happened across these campuses. Because an unfair labor practice does have to be tied to your terms and conditions of employment, right, in the contract. You can't, it can't be just a totally political strike. Now, the union's pretty clear it's not that situation, and obviously the state labor board did not agree with the university. So, for now, the strike continues, and I think it's really important that the union has had the back of these folks who have been, attacked by the police, attacked by counter demonstrators. It's not that hard for the university campuses to do the right thing, to respect people's rights, to divest from war and genocide. It's really not that difficult. The university can stop this pretty easily if they wanted to. But it looks like they're going to fight tooth and nail. They've lawyered up and they're, taking this through the process. They're claiming that the pro-Palestinian encampments disrupt normal access to some classes and, quote, impeded our educational mission, which is just very ironic because I think it's clear that those young folks, primarily young folks, but the diverse number of folks who are out there doing these protests clearly have learned something, and they've learned to speak up. They've learned to speak up against crimes against humanity. And they've learned that, when our tax dollars are funding and fueling these crimes against humanity, that it implicates us as Americans, and that we have a right and a responsibility to speak up. So shout out to the UAW for the work they're doing to defend their members and their willingness to strike over this. It's still going to be decided in terms of the ULP charges and whether or not this strike is shown to be legal or not. So it still could be judged illegal at some point, but we'll find out. Obviously, the campuses are going to be impacted greatly. We don't know where the next one will be. The system is preparing for a strike at Berkeley, though none has been announced yet. But yeah, we'll find out. I also wanted to mention that several unions did sign a press release supporting the campus protesters. It was put out by the UE, United Electrical Workers, but unions representing over 1 million workers released a statement in support of campus protesters at colleges and universities across the country. The unions are members of the National Labor Network for Ceasefire, which we are hoping to speak with them next week. But it was quite a few unions: APWU, the American Postal Workers Union, the flight attendants, IUPAT, the painters, UAW, National Nurses United, Chicago Teachers Union, even a couple SEIU, as well as Local 3000 of the UFCW. So over 1 million members from those unions that all stand in solidarity with the campus protesters. And then the last thing on this that's sort of related, while the academic workers are going on strike and potentially expanding this strike in California, there's also a local international longshore and warehouse union effort to block shipment of Israeli military cargo. And so that is the ILWU. They're meeting in Vancouver next month for their biennial convention. And no doubt there will be some discussions on this and what, dock workers can and can't do and should and shouldn't do when it comes to Israeli military cargo. So lots of things happening in relation to Palestine and the labor movement. I personally am proud to see our labor unions being more vocal and speaking up and taking action. Often throughout our history, organized labor hasn't always been on the right side of foreign policy, frankly, and has often fallen prey to nationalism and militarism. And so it's really important that our labor unions are speaking up for peace and defending and representing our members who are speaking up for peace and who are being victimized in response. So keep your eyes on California. I know it's outside of the South, but that's a huge strike. Nearly 50,000 workers potentially involved, over 10 campuses. It's, stay tuned on that, and we'll see, what happens with it this summer and the legality of the strike. But one of the themes of today's conversations, I think, is that, laws are one thing, but power is something else. And so whether the strike is deemed illegal or illegal, it's really the power behind it that's going to be impactful and make a difference as to whether it makes a lasting impact and makes a lasting difference.
Yeah. The last thing that we wanted to get to was Boss Watch, so we will go ahead and go through that relatively quickly, and then we'll go ahead and get out of here. So the first up was in Texas, where the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, the EPA, and the U.S. Department of Justice announced the filing of a felony criminal charge and a related civil complaint and consent decree against under the Clean Air Act against TPC Group, which is a Texas petrochemical company. So TPC Group entered a guilty plea to a one-count information charging the company with a violation of the Clean Air Act before the U.S. Magistrate Judge Zach Hawthorne for the Eastern District of Texas. The filings address explosions that caused injuries, evacuations, and significant air pollution. The company has agreed to pay over $30 million in criminal fines and civil penalties and spend approximately $80 million to improve its risk management program and improve safety issues at TPC Group's Port Neches and Houston facilities. According to the information provided in court on November 27th, 2019, and this is, another example of just how sluggish the U.S. court system is and how absurd it is that bosses are able to get away with stuff like this for so long. According to information in 2019, 2 explosions at TPC Group's Port Neches facility prompted evacuations of thousands of residents from the city of Port Neches and surrounding areas, released more than 11 million pounds of extremely hazardous substances, and caused more than $130 million in off-site property damage and other impacts to human health and the environment. 4 employees and 1 contractor suffered injuries including concussions, burns, perforated eardrums, tinnitus, and cracked teeth. TPC Group's facility produced the hazardous chemical butadiene, which is used in the production of tires, latexes, and plastics. Butadiene can form a popcorn polymer, which can grow at an accelerating rate and cause catastrophic events, including explosions and fires. The company was aware that this polymer was forming in some of its production lines and the risk it posed, but failed to take necessary measures to prevent the explosion. An initial explosion occurred at the facility's south unit, a secondary explosion followed, and a series of fires erupted at the facility which blew contaminants into the air. As a result of the explosions, mandatory evacuations were ordered for residents within a 4-mile radius of the facility. Voluntary orders to shelter in place were issued for residents in the surrounding area, and local schools were closed for multiple days to allow buildings to be cleaned, repaired, and inspected. The company has agreed to pay $18 million in criminal fines. The plea agreement also includes a 1-year term of probation and publishing a public apology. The $12.1 million in civil penalty payments will be made through bankruptcy proceedings. TPC Group will also spend approximately $80 million to improve its risk management program and improve safety issues at both facilities. TPC Group has been criminally charged and pleaded guilty to knowingly failing to implement its own written operating procedures, including monthly flushing of production lines that would have prevented the explosion. Clean Air Act regulations require planning to prevent accidental releases of hazardous chemicals and makes implementation of those plans mandatory. Under the proposed civil consent decree, TPC Group is required to update safety information for equipment at its Port Neches and Houston facilities to ensure that they are designed, maintained, inspected, and operated in a safe manner. TPC Group must overhaul its process hazard analysis program to ensure prompt completion of all corrective actions and remedial measures to mitigate hazards at the facilities. And so they're going to be taking some, presumably, hopefully taking more precautions in the future. But yeah, absolutely wild stuff that bosses can get away with for so long. Over in Mississippi, the Department of Labor has obtained a federal consent judgment that requires a Greenville cleaning and janitorial service and its owner to pay more than $127,000 in back wages, liquidated damages, and compensatory damages following a court's finding that the 2 illegally terminated workers for asserting their rights to federally mandated sick leave. Before entering a consent judgment on March 4th, 2024, Jesse's Cleaning Service, LLC, the U.S. District Court for the Northern District of Mississippi issued an order finding that Jesse's Cleaning Service illegally terminated the workers after they asserted their right to be paid under the Emergency Paid Sick Leave Act, provisions of the Families First Coronavirus Response Act and the Fair Labor Standards Act. As part of this finding, the court found that Jesse's Cleaning Service and Jesse Teleferro owed $110,000 in back wages and liquidated damages and about $17,000 in compensatory damages. In addition to ordering the payment of the monetary damages, the consent judgment prohibits the defendants from further violating the FLSA. I love how that's always part of these.
Don't do it again.
Like, don't violate the law again, as if, you do have to reiterate that to people because they feel entitled to violating the law. In Alabama, TCI of Alabama, which is a recycling, removal, and disposal and repair company, will pay $90,000 and provide other relief to settle an EEOC retaliation lawsuit. The EEOC charged that TCI violated federal law by terminating an employee for participating in an internal investigation about a charge filed with the EEOC, alleging that TCI's hiring practices discriminated against females. The employee who was retaliated against had been with TCI for 28 years. Such alleged conduct violates the anti-retaliation provision of Title VII of the Civil Rights Act. And according to the EEOC's complaint, after a female job applicant filed a charge of discrimination with the EEOC, TCI interviewed a longtime management employee about its hiring practices. The manager told the company's investigator that TCI had a practice of not hiring female laborers, which dated back to when the company first opened in 2007. The EEOC alleges that after the manager told the truth about TCI's discriminatory policy, TCI's president repeatedly pressured him to change his story. Quote, to change his story. When the manager refused to recant, TCI terminated him. Under the 3-year consent decree resolving the lawsuit, TCI will pay $90,000 in monetary damages to the employee it terminated, adopt and distribute an anti-retaliation policy to its employees and all staffing agencies it utilizes, post a notice to employees about the settlement, and provide annual mandatory training to owners, managers, and employees on the protections of Title VII for employees and applicants. A few dishonorable mentions this week. The U.S. DOL found Tequila Tepeke number 1 and number 2 in Pharr and McAllen, Texas, respectively, paid cooks, servers, and non-exempt managers hourly wages for all hours worked and failed to pay the required time and one-half rate for hours over 40 in a work week. Additionally, the employers failed to keep federally required records. The department recovered about $37,000 in back wages and liquidated damages for 19 employees. In 2023, the division found more than $29 million owed for nearly 26,000 food service industry workers, just food service industry workers, and that's just the ones that they caught.
Right.
Dragon Rig Sales and Service LLC, which is a manufacturing and service company which builds oil field service equipment for energy and industrial companies in Beaumont, Texas, will pay $35,000 and furnish other relief to settle an EEOC disability discrimination lawsuit which alleged the company discriminated against an applicant with anxiety and opioid use disorder because of their medication, not because they had any evidence that the prospective employee could not perform their job duties. Smithfield Foods in Atlanta, Georgia, violated federal law when they fired a senior sales employee because of her age, the EEOC charged in a lawsuit. The employee, who had been working for Smithfield for 10 years, was fired in a supposed reduction in force, where almost all the workers happened to be over 55. And finally, Tractor Supply Company agreed to pay $75,000 and provide other relief to settle a disability discrimination and retaliation lawsuit filed by the EEOC, alleging that in Mississippi, the company disclosed, subjected to hostility, and ultimately terminated an employee born with HIV. I think, Adam, we talked about this like a year ago, didn't we?
Yeah, it felt really familiar.
Yeah.
So yeah,
I think this is that same case, and they settled it finally.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember that when it came out because that was so effing wild.
It was very gross, the behavior of the company. Yeah.
Yeah, folks should go back and search up Tractor Supply Company, Mississippi, HIV. And you will see some crazy news stories and press releases from the EEOC with the alleged activity from Tractor Supply Company and the managers. I mean, absolutely. It was super wild. I don't remember all of it off. I just remember the feeling of being like, wow, that's happening today, the year of our Lord 2023.
Right.
So there you go, folks. That's going to be it for us on the program today. Appreciate everybody tuning in.
We do have a caller on the line.
Oh, do we have a caller on the line?
Yeah, we've got a caller on the line.
Very cool.
We'll take a call, and then we got a couple of plugs as we wrap up as well.
All right. So, let's see. Caller, you're the only one on the line, so I don't have your area code pulled up. But what's your name? Where are you calling from?
My name's Peter, and I'm a student worker at UAW 4811. So I heard you were talking about our strike.
Hell yeah. Very cool. Very cool. Well, hey, thanks for calling in. And what's on your mind? What did you want to share with us?
Well, I don't know where to start, but I guess I would emphasize that, the strike has really been pushed forward by rank and file organizing, and I think we need to look for support in the rest of the labor movement. So we're trying to organize a LA-wide rally here at UCLA and invite, unionists and workers from and Palestine activists from around the city. And, we're going to have a powerful strike. We are very militant, I think, and I think we're going to really be working to shut down the university and so
do you feel like the momentum is on your side in terms of talking to your fellow workers and them really realizing what the strike is about, the stakes involved? And I mean, do you feel it's going in the right direction in terms of the support that you're getting from your fellow workers and members at large?
I think opinion has changed over the last few weeks. I think seeing a fascist mob attack students on campus certainly changed people's minds about some things.
Right.
brought new people into this. So
that's what I was
been
wondering.
one achievement of the organizing.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering. If just like the way things are developing, I would imagine would have to wake up some folks who maybe were on the fence, a couple weeks ago. Yeah, I mean, and so I'm curious also in terms of support from the other labor unions and getting broader labor support. Would love to, hear how that's going, but also just wish you success in that, because I think that's going to be really important that, that y'all are not isolated and that there's broad support from our entire movement for your strike and for, the defense of your own members.
Yeah, absolutely. We have, I think it's around 10 unions at the University of California, but we all, have our own contracts and we go out separately. But rank and file workers in UPD and AFT and AFSCME have supported us. Roofers Union, ATU, I've seen a couple of rank and file members here and there. So yeah, I mean, I think we have to sort of all go out together when, an injury to one is an injury to all. So yeah, I would call on, workers in other unions to join our picket lines and join the strike.
Yeah.
What was it that what were the things that initiated the protests insofar as as it relates to the University of California? I know that obviously they're in opposition to Israel's attacks on Gaza, but is there something in particular about the University of California system? Do they have some tie to the Israeli military that the protests are aimed at eliminating?
Sure. Well, the protests were started primarily by undergraduate organizers and, really set off by the wave of university protests, beginning with Columbia University. And here at the University of California, this is a major institution in the state. It controls over $100 billion in assets. And among those assets, there are, investments in military contractors of who knows how much exactly, but it's in the billions of dollars. And so, the students are calling on them to disclose the investment, since we are only partially aware of what they include. But there's no doubt that they include very substantial investments in BlackRock, which is world's biggest private investor in military contractors, also direct investments in military contractors. And then, you have the university's relationship with Israeli universities, and the list goes on. So, you also get DoD funding. So those are the sorts of things that students are targeting.
And why do you think it is that the university system clamped down so violently against the protests, and that they allowed, this real fascist mob to attack its own undergraduates?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, I mean, it seems to be a nationwide policy that they really don't want these protests there, and I think it's a huge public relations failure, not only for the university but for the Democratic Party and the political establishment. And the university regents, who are the top decision-making body in the university, they're basically a lot of them are multimillionaires, political operatives. I think many of them, 18, I think, are directly appointed by the governor. So, and he actually sits on the board of regents himself. So, I find it hard to believe that city and state government weren't to some degree aware of what was happening the night of April 30th. We've seen how fast the police response can be, but in this case, the fascists were allowed to attack students for 3+ hours without any kind of impediment. And so, yeah, I would say that the union really needs to put together some sort of tribunal or committee that would conduct an independent investigation of what happened that night. And in particular, the role of the chancellor and the Karen Bass, the mayor, and Governor Newsom in standing down the police to let that attack go ahead.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I mean, a very good point. And I think getting to the facts of that and who was really behind it all and who knew what, I think that's really important. And I appreciate what you mentioned earlier about the university connections to the broader machine, because there are some folks listening who may think, well, what does this really have to do with their jobs?
Right.
But it has a lot to do with their jobs. I mean, beyond the fact that you should be able to be on your campus without fear of attack, when your own pensions are invested in genocide, that's a valid question, right? I mean, it's fair for us to ask these questions. And I think the repression that we're seeing in response, I mean, is indicative of their guilt, frankly. And it reminds me of the crackdown on Occupy Wall Street when, it seemed like that, and we found out later there was a coordinated national move to clear out encampments and to, try to dismantle this movement. So I really appreciate you calling in and appreciate you, shedding some light on it. I don't know if there was anything else you wanted to share and make sure we...
Well, yeah, I had two more questions.
Okay.
If it was all right, or
you made the mistake of calling, so now you're on the hot seat.
Is that all right? Are you all right with that, caller?
Oh yeah, that's fine.
Okay, yeah, cool. Have you been able to? Has the union been able to get the university to the bargaining table yet?
Well, I believe the Public Employees Relations Board has compelled the university and the union to negotiate behind closed doors, but the union has said publicly that it wants the university to negotiate with the student movement over its demands, and so this isn't really something for the union to, the union's executive board to decide for the student movement. We have our interest in this fight for sure. Our members were attacked. People were injured quite badly, 25 sent to the emergency room on April 30th, and then injured again the following day, police firing rubber bullets indiscriminately into the crowd. So that's a workplace safety issue. Right. We also have students that are being charged with criminal misdemeanors and student conduct charges probably. So we want amnesty for the students. But more importantly, really, we want to uplift the demands of the student movement, and we want the university to negotiate with the students rather than trying to attack them with police. And the police actually still have a lot of presence on this campus, have had a presence here for 3 weeks. And, the following Monday after the encampment was attacked by police, more people were arrested because they were gathering in a parking garage about to stage a peaceful protest. And they were just arrested for gathering. They said they were violating a curfew. And then later they changed the charge to criminal conspiracy to commit burglary because they were going to go sit in and inside a building. So, I mean, they're really upping the policing of the campus. They've established a new office of campus safety headed by this guy, Rick Braziel, who has a sordid history as a police chief and was involved in the inquiry around Uvalde and finding none of the police guilty of any wrongdoing there. So, we're against it.
Great. Yeah.
And then the final question, I figured, while we have you, it'd be good to just get your response to this. And, we've been responding to this narrative that, everybody from Joe Biden to racist Mississippi frat boys have been saying about these protests, which is that they are, drenched in anti-Semitism and all of that kind of nonsense. And so, as somebody who, I don't know if you've been involved in the protest, but obviously you're involved with the union at the University of California. And you've at least been aware of these protests and interacted with folks involved in them. How would you respond to these accusations of anti-Semitism and the like?
Yeah, well, first of all, we do have a caucus, rank and file caucus, that has been actually a part of the divestment coalition, and we've been a part of helping organize the protests. And among the leaders of the caucus are many Jewish students, actually. And Jewish Voice for Peace is an organization that's also a member of that coalition. So one of the encampment leads, who's since been doxxed very badly, is Jewish. And so, no, the accusations of anti-Semitism are absolutely absurd. Our side was not violent. They were incredibly peaceful. The atmosphere in the encampment was great. You know, we had a people's library and teach-ins and assemblies and things like that. But, you know, we were attacked and harassed relentlessly for a week, culminating with, 200 plus fascists attacking people with metal poles and fireworks. So, yeah, it's utterly false.
Appreciate it. Thanks for calling in, and feel free to call in anytime to keep us updated.
Yeah, definitely do that, and appreciate all you're doing, and good luck and solidarity, brother.
Okay, thanks. Solidarity.
Yep. All right. Thanks for catching me, Adam. I wouldn't have checked the call-in line. So yeah. So that's going to be it for us today. I did have an announcement that I was requested to pass on from the president of the Nashville CLC. She just texted me that Wednesday, May 29th at 7 a.m., Step Up Louisiana is going to be gathering outside Dollar General's headquarters in Goodlettsville. Step Up Louisiana is an organization advocating for social and economic justice. They will be returning to Middle Tennessee, which is where Goodlettsville is, to protest Dollar General at their annual shareholders meeting, because Dollar General has a long-standing record of neglecting the safety of both its employees and customers. So 7 a.m. Wednesday, May 29th in Goodlettsville, Tennessee. Step Up Louisiana is going to be there protesting Dollar General at their annual shareholders meeting. If you're in the area, you ought to swing by, take some video and send it into the show. But yeah, if you've been listening to the show for a while, you will have seen Dollar General featured fairly prominently as a recurring guest on Boss Watch. I mean, there's just constantly stuff coming out of Dollar General. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I just met some folks from Step Up Louisiana this week. Good folks. Appreciate what they're doing there. And for final plugs, also don't forget on Tuesday the 28th, Alabama Rise is holding a legislative session recap. That's online. So Tuesday evening, if you want to hear the good, the bad, and the ugly from Alabama's legislative session, go to alarise.org and register for that. And don't forget, on June 5th, that we have our fundraiser at St. Stephen's Hall in Clinton Avenue, Campus 805, down here in Huntsville. It's going to be a great time. Film screening, live music, raising some money for the Valley Labor Report. So y'all come on out and have a good time.
All right. See you next week, folks.